650. Yes, the latest issue of the journal has been published. Ning Yarrow let Chen Pinggan return to the city first and reminded him to be careful on the way. Dong Huafu felt that her words were a little redundant. Dong Huafu's style had always been straightforward. Chen Sancho smiled and said, "It would be troublesome if there weren't any redundant words between a man and a woman." Dong Huafu nodded in agreement and then asked, "Do you have the chance to speak?" Chen Sancho imitated the second shopkeeper and smiled. Dong Huafu was afraid that the second shopkeeper would hold a grudge against him, but he was not afraid of Chen Sancho, who wanted to be his brother-in-law even in his dreams. Therefore, he said something to make things worse. "Did my sister become a sword cultivator of the hidden official's lineage because she wanted to hide from you? If that's the case, then it's too much. I'll speak up for you later. I still have this bit of loyalty." Chen Sancho shook his head and said, "Not really. Your sister is a straightforward person. If she likes someone, she likes them. If she doesn't like them, she doesn't like them. She won't do it on purpose. Liking someone was always good." Besides, ever since Chen Sancho started wearing open-crotch pants, he felt that the neighbor's sister Dong did not become good just because he liked her. She was really good. Just like the first time Chen Sancho saw the words childhood sweetheart in a book, he felt that it was the most touching phrase in the world. Things like a calm lake or a fiery autumn mountain had to be put aside. To say that Dong Bu was beautiful was actually not enough. It was just that after so many years, the more Chen Sancho drank, the more he liked her. Before Chen Pinggan arrived at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Chen Sancho would always head over to Dong Bu's side to observe the battle from afar. This time, when the situation was dire, Chen Sancho had lent a helping hand. Dong Bu thanked her after the battle and gave her a heart-wrenching reply. This was the second time Dong Bu had explicitly told Chen Sancho that they were both sword cultivators and friends. They could help each other on the battlefield, but he advised Chen Sancho not to have any thoughts of becoming Dao companions on the mountain. Whenever Dong Bu thought of this, goosebumps would appear all over his body. That time, Chen Sancho returned to the city and drank some wine. On the way home, he pushed walls and crashed into trees again. Chen Pinggan's injuries were not light. Not only were his skin, flesh, tendons, and bones damaged, the most troublesome part was the sword qi left behind by the sword cultivator's flying swords and the injuries caused by the many demon cultivators attacking his natal item. However, Chen Pinggan's spirit didn't decrease. Instead, it increased. Ning Yarrow hadn't seen Chen Pinggan with such bright eyes in a long time. Words is words. He picked up a damaged sword of unknown origin. The sword itself was not too mysterious, but it was heavy. It was probably made of good materials and was worth some money. In the Jianghu of the vassal states of the Aquarius continent, this was a real divine weapon. Even the gods of the mountains and rivers of those places were afraid of it. Chen Pinggan took the lead to fly north on his sword. He chose a place where the demon army's battle formation was weak. He punched a little along the way. He did not go directly to the top of the city wall. Instead, he rode his sword to the highest point of the word Meng on the city wall. He sat cross-legged and took out the blade-strengthening gourd. He drank a few mouthfuls of Osmanthus wine and observed the battlefield closely. While he meditated and recuperated, he skillfully bandaged his wounds. Every big word carved on the wall, every horizontal stroke, was an excellent place for cultivation. But when it came to the stage of the battle, these natural sword cultivators' training grounds were often places of death. Therefore, the old sword cultivators who could cultivate here for hundreds of years must have great killing power and were very good at preserving their lives. Not far from Chen Pinggan, there was an old sword cultivator who was meditating with his eyes closed. He did not stand up to greet him, so Chen Pinggan did not disturb him. Looking at the old man's appearance, he should be the nascent soul sword cultivator Yin Chen on the 6th page of the 3rd book. He was old, but the bottleneck was hard to break. He had always been stuck in the nascent soul realm. He had an arrogant personality and was a loner with no family. The sword cultivators of the Great Wall of Sword Qi almost always had close friends. They were either alive or dead. But Yin Chen never had any. As long as he entered the battlefield, his killing intent would be huge. Once he used his sword, he would not differentiate between friend and foe. Therefore, he killed many demons, but the battle achievements he accumulated were not much. He was not as good as many young Jindan sword cultivators, because many of his battle achievements were erased. The old sword cultivator Yin Chen's reputation was even worse. After all, no one was willing to get close to a monster who would even kill their own sword cultivators. Every page of the first and third book had different annotations from the hidden officials' sword cultivators. If there were too many sword cultivators in the Summer Palace, they would add in a few extra pages. Yin Chen, who was ranked very high in the third book, had very few opinions. Only Chou Miao and Lin Junbai had written a few words. Their opinions were completely different from the common view of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. In terms of accidental injuries on the battlefield, almost every sword immortal had done it. Those who harmed the innocent did not deserve to be scolded. But Yin Chen was different. Many times, the old man's swift and fierce sword attacks were precisely calculated to kill a few sword cultivators. According to the division of responsibilities of the hidden official's lineage, the old sword cultivator Yin Chen only needed to guard the place. He did not need to leave the city to fight. Chen Pinggan finished bandaging the wounds of various sizes. He took out a filth removal talisman and quickly got rid of the bloodstains. He was a guest after all. Even if the host did not smile, it was not a reason for the guest to be disrespectful. The old man opened his eyes and said hoarsely, "Kid, you are really interesting. I have seen a few pure martial artists of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. When others use their fists, they are restrained by flying swords and magic treasures. You, on the other hand, are suppressing yourself." Chen Pinggan turned his head and smiled. "Senior Yin has good eyesight." The old man asked, "Don't you have a knot in your heart because I didn't call you Lord Hidden Official?" Chen Pinggan said, "No." Yin Chen looked at the front line of the battlefield. To the north of the Golden River, there was Ning Yarrow who helped. To the south, there was the sword cultivator who was responsible for opening the formation. Yin Chen sneered, "Every time I see these so-called young geniuses, I can't help but feel depressed. How can you compare yourself to others?" Chen Pinggan smiled. "More sword cultivators will be the same when they see Senior Yin." In fact, Yin Chen was also one of the young geniuses. He was extremely outstanding. His glory at the Great Wall of Sword Qi back then was roughly equivalent to the present Lord Jiao Yi and Situ Weiran. Practicing the sword was extremely smooth. He broke through the realms with irresistible force. He only stopped when he reached the nascent soul realm. He did not expect that this pause would lead to hundreds of years of wasted time. Yin Chen sneered, "Other than looking up at people and secretly drooling, what else can trash do? Take me for example. I have been sitting here all year long. I went from a young trash to an old trash. A person who would even scold himself when he was ruthless was basically invincible when it came to quarreling." Chen Pinggan asked, "Senior Yin, did you see through the background of the man who held the sword?" Yin Chen sneered, "The reclusive officials are getting worse with each generation. You are just an outsider whose realm is not high anymore. You relied on your connections to take over Senior Xiao Chuo's summer palace. There are countless secret records in the archives. In the end, you don't even know this little bit of information. Even if you can't recognize him, can't you guess?" Chen Pinggan did not mind these words. "You scolded you, I asked my questions." He continued probing, "Is it the Heaven's Pride who is ranked at the top of the moon supporting Mountain's 100 sword deities? Is his ranking similar to Zhu Gong and Li Zhen? Yin Chen, on the other hand, asked your questions and scolded me. Now I guess the entire Great Wall of Sword Qi has said all kinds of nasty things about Senior Xiao Chuo. They are really a bunch of bastards who have no parents to teach them. If I were Senior Xiao Chuo, I would break through the Great Wall of Sword Qi and find out all the sword cultivators who scolded me before. If they dare to scold me, they can live. If they don't, they can die. That's how satisfying it is. Oh right, previously when the great demon Yang Ji killed that south wandering sword deity, you were also scolded for the sake of the big picture. How did it feel? If you were to do it again, would you just let those sword cultivators who are courting death be?" Chen Pinggan said, "Alliance once told me that if a person can survive, he must not die. If I can save many people by being scolded, is there a better deal than this? I don't think so. Yin Chen immediately shut his mouth. It was not about how right the young man's reasoning was. It was not the case at all. This young reclusive official was a reclusive disciple of the literary sage's lineage. He was his junior brother and even had a good relationship with the great sword deity. Yin Chen did not care about him at all. Only when he was related to Alliance did Yin Chen have a headache. Indeed, Yin Chen had been screwed over by that son of Ibi *tch in the last 100 years. He had really caught a fat sheep and was plucking it. After plucking the fat sheep, he would replace it with a skinny sheep. When the skinny sheep was gone, the fat sheep would probably recover some of its wealth. Very well, then he would pluck another one. If a Liang only had such means, Yin Chen would have just ignored him. However, that fellow had really squatted beside him and mumbled to himself for several hours just so that he could say something to old immortal Yin Chen. Only then would this trip to the Great Wall of Sword Qi be worth it. Yin Chen couldn't help but curse at a Liang. In the end, a Liang immediately turned hostile and was pinned to the ground, giving him a good beating. When Alliance left, he was very refreshed. He did his signature action of running his hands through his hair and saying, "Awesome, awesome. Quarreling and fighting, big and small, over 800 fights, and I still won all of them." Yin Chen was lying on the ground and was stunned for a long time. After that, Alliance often came to find old immortal Yin. He called it a chat and increased his winning percentage once or twice. Remembering Liang, Yin Chen was not entirely resentful. After all, the two of them had never actually sparred with Q-Sword. It was more of that man bragging about how he was liked by good girls in the vast world. It was just that from the beginning to the end, he had never mentioned a girl's name to Yin Chen. However, Alliance occasionally said a few serious words, and they were all aimed at Yin Chen's nascent soul bottleneck. No matter how bad Yin Chen's temper was, he still had to remember this favor. Yin Chen might not know how to be a person, but he was still very clear about good and bad people. Sometimes, perhaps because he was too clear, he was too lazy to know how to be a person. The two of them did not know each other, and their temperaments were too different. In fact, there was nothing to talk about. Moreover, Yin Chen did not like to drink. Otherwise, Chen Pinggan would have given him a bottle of Bamboo Sea Paradise wine. Yin Chen suddenly said, "Do all the pure martial artists in the world practice martial arts like this?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "The way of practicing martial arts is actually very similar. You can't escape the fact that you have to be beaten before you learn martial arts. The only difference is the strength." Yin Chen asked again. He said, "You picked up so much trash in front of Ning Yao. Aren't you embarrassed?" Now, there was something to talk about. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "I have a lot of bad habits. Fortunately, Ning Yao doesn't mind." Yin Chen asked, "I think you look ordinary. You're just passable. How did you hook up with her?" "I only heard that Ning Yao went to the world once, but I didn't expect that she would be so vicious. In my opinion, you're far inferior to that Cao Ci. I specially went to the city wall to take a look at that guy. Whether it's his appearance or his martial arts, you can't compare at all." It was great to chat like this. The old senior was praising him. Chen Pinggan hurriedly got up and sat down close to old immortal Yin. He drank a mouthful of wine and said with a smile, "I can't compare to you in martial arts. I admit it. If we're talking about appearance, the difference isn't big." Unexpectedly, Yin Chen suddenly turned hostile. "I'm going to take care of my sword. I'll have to trouble hidden official to make way. Don't be an eyesore here. You're not likable." Chen Pinggan resentfully got up and left on his sword. Yin Chen clenched his fists and rested them on his knees. He smiled. All the scholars in the world deserved a beating. Chen Pinggan went to the thatched cottage at the city wall. He first greeted the great sword immortal Wei Jin, who held up half of the wine shop's sky. Wei Jin smiled and said, "What a good fist. Anyway, it looks very powerful. It has the style of the invincible divine fist sect's old leader. It's just that it's a bit slow to chisel through the formation." Using his fists to kill a remote wandering martial artist of the desolate world was naturally not a big achievement compared to a sword immortal's sword attack. However, it was still rare. It would be a delicious dish to accompany wine. Chen Pinggan laughed and said, "Next time we go to the shop, I'll give you a bowl of Yangchun noodles. That way, you can talk less." Wei Yijin pointed at the thatched cottage behind him. "Boss Sword Immortal is not in a good mood. You should talk more." Chen Pinggan and Wei Yijin parted ways. As soon as he landed on the city wall, Boss Sword Immortal walked out of the thatched cottage with his hands behind his back habitually. "Yo, Martial God Chen. Your arrival brings light to my humble abode." Chen Pinggan found it strange. Boss Sword Immortal was not so polite in the past. In his impression, Boss Sword Immortal was a person of virtue and prestige who cherished his words like gold. Chen Qingdou glanced at Chen Pinggan. His injuries were not bad and he had gained a lot. He said in his mind, "I owe you 2 secrets. Now I can tell you." Chen Pinggan restrained his expression. However, Boss Sword Immortal's 2 so-called little secrets were bigger than the other. One was about the Great Wall of Sword Chi, the hometown of all the felons. Half of the earliest ancient felons' hometown was from the desolate world, and the other half was from the 5th world that was now opened. Chen Pinggan was stunned. So, half of the felons and their descendants were actually in their hometown from the beginning? So, they were born in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, died in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, and were all in their hometown? Then, if the remaining half of the felons' descendants wanted to return to their roots, it had something to do with the 5th world. As long as they could survive, they would at least have a chance to return home. The second secret was even bigger. Big Brother Sword Immortal's words were extremely shocking. The path of martial artists to the heavens was actually a path to becoming a god, and it would also involve military cultivators. Although Chen Pinggan had some guesses before, when Boss Sword Immortal said it himself, he immediately understood a lot of things. For example, he no longer found it strange that there was a golden body on the path of martial arts. And all the gods in the world created a golden body, which was the foundation of the great Tao. Putting aside the fact that the heroic spirits had become gods, the process of a living person becoming a god was similar to the experience of the Iron Talisman River's water deity Yang Hua. Emaciated body and bones was a path that one had to go through. This was actually similar to a martial artist's tempering of the body and bones. Chen Qingdu did not say it out loud. Anyway, this kid liked to think. He would have plenty of time to ponder over the first pages of this old almanac. He walked slowly with Chen Pinggan. Since they had started walking, they could not turn back after a few steps, so the old man said a little more. Since ancient times, there has been a difference between gods and immortals. First gods, then immortals. Why? According to today's saying, if a person's soul does not dissipate after death, that person is a god. Enjoying the incense offerings of the mortal world, one does not need to cultivate to be able to stabilize their golden body. Immortals who do not die are those chi cultivators who are now lying in the mountains. When scholars write history books, they always delete and subtract. Over time, they get further and further away from the truth. If you have the chance in the future, you can go to the 3 great academies and become the reclusive disciple of that old scholar. You can flip through a few worthless old books. You still have the face to do that. Chen Pinggan only listened and remembered these sayings. They were not significant for the time being. If he were to be more pragmatic, it could be said that they were meaningless. However, the following statement made Chen Pinggan's ears perk up obediently, afraid that he would miss a single word. First you travel far away, then you reach the peak, then you reach the 10th realm of martial arts. It is divided into 3 levels: vigor, purity, and godly arrival. What is godly arrival? I remember there is a saying in your hometown. What is it called? Arrival. Chen Pinggan blurted out, if a person's skills are good enough, whether it is farming or making porcelain, others like to praise him as arrival. Chen Qingdu nodded. Arrival? 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 How do you walk? Who will guard the door? The answer is in your hometown. What is it again? Chen Pinggan said, me. Chen Qingdu smiled and nodded. He then explained in detail the third level of the 10th realm. But for the first time, the old man had a nostalgic expression. In the Aquarius continent, he had an old friend. He had also drawn a circle on the ground and imprisoned himself for 10,000 years. So Chen Qingdu said something off-topic, embroidered tiger Kui Dong is really powerful. Chen Pinggan said, that year, in the first round of the Truth Heart game, because Mr. Qi was there, I passed it safely. When Mr. Qi was not there, I could not pass the second round no matter what. And that was because Kui Dong did not put all his effort into the game. Chen Qingdu said, all the sufferings that are difficult to endure are like a hole in the heart. The bigger the hole, the more it can hold in the future. Chen Pinggan nodded. But it was also possible to make up for that hole for the rest of one's life. For example, the more the world owes a person's childhood, the more that person will make up for it when they grow up. Leaving the city, Chen Pinggan flew on his sword to the private residence of the Summer Palace. He began to recuperate in peace. After a short 2 days, Chen Pinggan made a trip to the Summer Palace. He came and went as he pleased. He held the jade token in his hand and did not need to use a contraction talisman. Chen Pinggan chose a secluded place and watched Grandma Bai teach the children martial arts. She was talking about what the whole body is a fist meant, how to learn, and how to practice. Chen Pinggan was familiar with one of the children. It was the tomboy called Yuan Zhaohua. He gave her 2 folding fans. She was the only girl in the Great Wall of Sword Qi who could use her real ability to cheat the second shopkeeper of his money. As for the other children, Chen Pinggan was familiar with them. This was because they were the martial arts seeds that he and the hidden official had carefully selected. One of the children had already been brought to the central divine continent by Yu Zhuanfu. The others who were not too late to learn martial arts were all here. The Great Wall of Sword Qi had many sword cultivators, but there were very few pure martial artists. If the Great Wall of Sword Qi was breached and the world changed, it would be reduced to a piece of land in the wilderness. Would the fortune of martial artists be left for the wilderness? Of course not. However, Chen Pinggan also knew that there was little hope for this group of children to compete for the title of strongest if they were to make a last-minute effort. Moreover, there was a natural pressure in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The Great Tao clashed violently. He did not understand before, but after being pointed out by the eldest sword immortal on the city wall, he understood. The female martial god of the central divine continent, Pei Wan, had most likely come prepared. As for Cao Ci, she was purely focused on martial arts. She never needed martial arts fate. Chen Pinggan admitted that he was far inferior to Cao Ci in this aspect. Now, as long as martial arts fate was willing to come, Chen Pinggan wished that the martial arts fate could call 4 relatives and family members to come and welcome guests. The more, the better. But even if this group of children practiced martial arts hastily and could not earn martial arts fate, it did not matter much. As long as they had a skill and a good foundation, they could survive no matter where they went in the future. Or rather, their chances of survival would only be greater. In a chaotic world, if one wanted to settle down, one had to fight for a place to stay. Many times, identity was not very useful. At the training field, Grandma Bai punched out. The distance was very short, and the punch was only half an arm's length. But the fist intent was very strong. It was natural and natural. At the level of a martial artist of the 7th realm, the so-called fist moves were actually a competition of the depth of the fist intent. It was similar to a simple manifestation of the Great Tao. Grandma Bai's punch landed without warning on a strong-looking boy beside her. The latter stood in place without moving, his expression saying, "Kill me if you can." It was Jiang Yun, who came from a noble family on Taixiang Street. His talent was very outstanding. When Grandma Bai stopped punching, the child did not realize that he, who was not afraid at all, was actually sweating profusely. This was a rare latent talent. Grandma Bai punched again. Her fist almost touched the forehead of a girl from Yuhu Street. The latter was slightly weaker than Jiang Yun. Although she did not move, her body shook slightly. More than 10 children stood in a row. Grandma Bai walked past them one by one. Some children retreated, while others gritted their teeth and stood in place. But Grandma Bai did not punch. However, Chen Pinggan could see that when Bai Mama walked to the children's side, her fist intent had already arrived. Unfortunately, there was only one child named Shu Gong from Mu Meng Alley. His intuition was correct. When Bai Mama's fist intent moved slightly, he had already moved back. Although his choice was the opposite of Jiang Yun's, they were all good seeds that had the potential to be possessed by the fist intent earlier. Looking at that tomboy Yuan Juhua, he looked as if he was facing a great enemy, but his body was tense. Grandma Bai quietly released her fist intent, but he still did not notice it. Chen Pinggan felt that this was nothing. On the path of martial arts, it was not that aptitude was not important. It was also very particular, but it was not as harsh as chi cultivators. It was also not like swordsmen who gambled their lives and relied on luck. Swordsmen did not rely on hardships to become swordsmen. But when it came to fist techniques, with a certain level of aptitude, one could be slow and steady. One's skills would gradually increase. Of course, the 3 realms would be a huge threshold. But it would not be difficult for these children to pass the 3 realms. It was only a matter of time and difficulty. Chen Pinggan leaned against a pillar in the corridor with his hands in his sleeves. He looked at the children. Those who wanted to learn fist techniques were mostly from poor backgrounds in Twilight Street and Twilight Street. Those who did not want to learn were usually from big clans like Jiang Yun. The children began to practice their stances again. Grandma Bai would occasionally help them twist their bones and tendons. Then, that child would begin to roll on the ground, wailing and crying. Seeing this, Chen Pinggan, who was originally in a peaceful state of mind, immediately became gloating. He was quite happy. But when he saw the tomboy and a child from a shabby alley lying on the ground in pain, he felt a little sad. Grandma Bai glanced in the direction of her son-in-law with a kind expression. The old woman's gaze was slightly inquiring. Chen Pinggan hurriedly waved his hand, indicating that he was just here to take a look. Unexpectedly, Grandma Bai still smiled and said, "Hidden official, there is someone here who wants to learn fist techniques from you. He thinks that my fist techniques are too feminine. Why don't you teach him?" Just as Chen Pinggan was about to decline, Jiang Yun crossed his arms and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Where is the hidden official? Damned little brat, who exactly is the hidden official here?" Chen Pinggan looked at the tomboy who sat up. He silently raised his hand, his arm trembling, and wiped the dust and sweat on his face. Grandma Bai smiled. Chen Pinggan could only quickly walk to the training field. Chen Pinggan did not do much. He only talked about some of the insights of the 6-step stance. It was concise and to the point. Jiang Yun thought that he had just started, but the young hidden official had already shut up. The child could not help but ask, "That's it?" Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "There is not much fist theory to begin with. This is the same principle as the thinner the book, the more knowledge it contains." He did not finish his sentence. The more the teachings of the 3 schools of thought and the 100 schools of thought, the more teachings there were, the more they would be written and interpreted. In the end, the branches and leaves would be luxuriant and all-encompassing. However, when dealing with children, the more complicated the explanations, the more they would be at a loss and at a loss. Grandma Bai smiled and said, "Hidden official, if you are not in a hurry to return to the summer palace, today's practice of the stance is almost done. You can teach this mountain quaking fist stance walking." With outsiders present, she naturally could not call him young master. Chen Pinggan thought for a moment. There was no problem staying here for an hour. He nodded and said with a smile, "This stance walking originates from the mountain quaking fist." Jiang Yun interrupted again, "Wait a moment, this fist technique's name is not domineering. Mountain quaking? Our great wall of sword chi, which sword cultivator does not flatten the mountain with one strike?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Then you will teach me fist techniques." Jiang Yun frowned and said, "Speak properly, be reasonable." Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly and continued, "The name of the fist technique's name is probably not very good. Then I will say a few more words." He talked about the general situation of martial artists in the vast world. He said that the martial artists in the marketplace who did not come from prestigious families had a variety of fist techniques. As long as they could break bricks and break rocks with their fists, it was already considered a very good martial art style. Therefore, the weight of the 2 words mountain quaking was not light at all. His words were mixed with some of Chen Ping'an's own experiences. Therefore, the children listened attentively. Of course, to be able to slack off for a moment and not be beaten up while standing in a stance and not be boring while walking, who would not like that? After he finished speaking, Chen Ping'an practiced walking a few times and then helped the children point out some flaws in the walking. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, during the break, Chen Ping'an talked about the streets and the scenery of the martial path peak of the 9th and 10th realm martial artists. The children loved to listen to this. Anyway, hiding in the cold palace was like a cage. They could not escape even if they wanted to. Jiang Yun had once urged the little girl from Yuhu Street to escape with them. In the middle of the night, they had just reached the top of the wall when they were pulled back by the fierce old woman. They were punished to stand in a stance. The little girl stood until she fainted, and Jiang Yun stood until he fell asleep. At that time, not far from where Jiang Yun and Jiang Yun stood, there were 2 children who took the initiative to stand in a stance. However, the latter was quickly chased away by Grandma Bai to rest. Practicing fist techniques was taboo. The poor learned literature and the rich learned martial arts. To practice martial arts, one needed a master to lead the way. Training one's muscles and bones required money. Otherwise, it was too easy to take a wrong path. Practicing fist techniques would only harm the body and waste one's energy. The fist intent did not enter one's body. Instead, it was like a ghost had taken over one's body. This was the greatest pain of many martial artists who did not have a master. Chen Ping'an calculated the time and left. Grandma Bai continued to teach the children. Jiang Yun muttered softly, "When we really meet, I'm so disappointed." Grandma Bai smiled, "When you feel that you have the right to fight with the hidden official, you will know what despair is." Jiang Yun shook his head and said, "Forget it, the second shopkeeper is too cunning. When my cultivation level is high enough to catch up to the second shopkeeper, I will definitely test him first. As long as he agrees to my ask fist, I will stop." Bai Momo shook her head. The Jiang clan was quite dutiful. How could they raise such a blabbermouth little bastard? Jiang Yun glanced at the old woman. The child felt even more strange now. Why did his grandfather like this old woman? Chen Ping'an returned to the summer palace. Then, he called Sword Immortal Cho Miao and went to Spring Banner House on Inverted Hanging Mountain. They also went to the Plum Blossom Garden. The book that Madame Ruoyon sent to the summer palace was not thin. Therefore, Chen Ping'an brought 2 more things that were close to him on this trip to Inverted Hanging Mountain. They were borrowed from Yang Ming and Nayland Saihuan. In the empty Plum Blossom Garden, Sword Immortal Cho Miao looked at the hidden official who was moving things with shining eyes. He could not help but ask, "You were also like this when you were in the Ning Mansion's secret vault?" Chen Ping'an did not bother to talk nonsense with him. How could it be the same? When they arrived at Spring Banner House and carefully looked through the account book, Wei Wenlong explained some of the tricks in it in a low voice. Sword Immortal Miu was a little sleepy. The result that Cho Miao and Lin Junbai were most worried about had not appeared yet. The 8 States ferry was still unimpeded and could reach Inverted Hanging Mountain smoothly. On the way here, Cho Miao suggested that they could raise the price appropriately. Chen Ping'an thought it was feasible and discussed the details with Yang Ming, Nayland Saihuan, and Xiao Yunyang. The price of some important materials remained the same. Otherwise, the financial operation of the Great Wall of Sword Qi would be too stressful. Even with the addition of the 2 private residences, Spring Banner House and Plum Blossom Garden, it would still be far from enough. However, for some of the second-rate spare materials of each ferry in the 8 continents, they could increase the price appropriately. After returning to the Great Wall of Sword Qi, this was the first time Chen Ping'an got close to the mirage north of the city. He did not enter it, but only looked from afar. Sword Immortal Cho Miao looked up at the sky and said telepathically, "Let's not talk about the killing power of the sword. If we only talk about the essence of the matter, can you do what Boss did?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and said, "It's very difficult. On the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Ning Yaro and the other sword cultivators took the lead to return to the city on their swords. Everyone was injured, and Stack Mountain was the most seriously injured. Chen Qingju walked out of the thatched cottage. Chen Sanxiu called him ancestor, and Chen Qingju grunted in acknowledgement. That was all. If an outsider met Chen Sanxiu when he was drinking, it would be very hard to imagine that this handsome young drunkard was Chen Qingju. The old sword immortal Chen Shi, who was able to carve the character Chen on the city wall, had once privately asked ancestor Chen Qingju if he could let Chen Sanxiu leave and follow a certain scholarly sage to study in the vast world. Chen Qingju only asked one question. Would Chen Sanxiu's surname be Chen in the future? In the end, Chen Shi dejectedly left the city wall. Chen Sanxiu respectfully bid farewell, and then took the lead to leave on his sword. The descendants of the Chen clan had always been like this. Having an ancestor whose swordsmanship truly reached the heavens was equivalent to not having one. It could even be said that it was better to not have one. Dong Huafu, Yang Zue, and the others also left. They would return to the city to recuperate for a few days, and Stack Mountain needed even more time to recover. Only Ning Yaro was left. Chen Pinggan rode on his sword and arrived at the city wall. Accompanying Ning Yaro on the city wall, Chen Pinggan's feet lightly swayed. Ning Yaro asked, "You've been staying in the summer palace for more than a year. Is it because you're hiding something and don't dare to see me?" Chen Pinggan wanted to say something but hesitated. Ning Yaro said, "Apart from the fact that you like someone else, there's nothing that can't be said." Chen Pinggan couldn't help but laugh. After a moment of silence, he said, "I didn't intend to say it, but I suddenly realized that what I think is the best may often end up being the worst. After all, when two people who like each other are together, it's really not a matter of one person. So I'd better tell you. After hearing it, you can hit people, but you're not allowed to be angry." After hearing this, Ning Yaro nodded. Chen Pinggan told her about that matter, which could be regarded as an agreement between him and the sword immortal. Ning Yaro didn't say anything. Chen Pinggan asked softly, "Not angry?" Ning Yaro asked back, "Is being angry useful?" Chen Pinggan thought for a moment. It seemed to be useless. But he didn't dare to say so. Ning Yaro raised her eyebrows. "That's it. She didn't say so." Chen Pinggan tapped his heels on the wall. Being together with Ning Yaro, as well as before, from meeting her, falling in love with her, to coming to Ning Yaro's side, traveling across mountains and rivers, and practicing martial arts, he would feel a little tired, but he would never feel tired mentally. Ning Yaro said, "If you have something on your mind in the future, just tell me. Even if I'm angry, I'll let you know." Chen Pinggan held her hand gently. Then the two of them looked into the distance quietly. Chen Qingju was taking a stroll. Every time, he didn't walk far. He walked slowly and then went back the way he came. He glanced at the backs of the young man and woman in the distance. Chen Qingju laughed because he thought of a very interesting thing. The reason why he had a good impression of Chen Pinggan when they first met had nothing to do with anything else. It didn't matter that he dared to punch Cao Ci and admit defeat in 3 rounds with Chen Pinggan. It didn't matter that he traveled all the way to the Great Wall of Sword Qi alone to deliver a sword to his beloved girl. It didn't even matter that Chen Pinggan was involved with that senior. Back then, Chen Qingju looked at the young man who had the potential to be an earth immortal but had his bridge of longevity broken. Especially when he looked at the young man's eyes and the vitality in him, Chen Qingju didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Unlike many old men in the Jianghu and seniors on the mountain, Chen Qingju was probably the only one who saw Chen Pinggan without any lethargy and was full of vitality instead. Back then, Chen Pinggan, who was still a young man, seemed to be silently asking questions. Moreover, he was asking the world in high spirits. Can I really become a great sword immortal? Can I make the girl I like me and always like me? Can I protect the girl I like in the future? Can I definitely not disappoint someone? I can definitely do all these, right? Chen Qingju felt that this was very good. No wonder that old scholar kept asking Chen Qingju shamelessly before he left. Is my reclusive disciple kind or not? Are you envious? You're kind and envious, right? Sigh, it's a pity that there's no point in being envious. If I were you, old brother Chen, I would have been punched in the face. Otherwise, it would be hard to quell the jealousy in your heart. 651. At the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry, there were no longer only Dali military ferries coming and going. More and more commercial ferries were coming and going. Pei Qian's eyes lit up when he saw this. It was all divine money rolling into his master's pocket. Because this long trip was on their own territory, the little girl in black beside Pei Qian felt that she couldn't be more impressive with a pole on her shoulder and a walking stick in her hand. Ju Meili felt a little regretful that she couldn't stick 2 pieces of paper on her forehead, one for the right guardian of Luopa Mountain and the other for the mute lake monster. Chen Wanshu was not far away, talking about trivial matters with Chen Lingjun, who was about to leave for the North Continent. Chen Lingjun kept yawning as he listened. Pei Qian crossed his arms and looked around. Looking at his master's great rivers and mountains, he nodded in satisfaction. Ju Meili asked softly, Chen Lingjun is about to leave. Shouldn't we say a few words? If we squeeze out some tears, it will seem more sincere. Pei Qian rolled his eyes and said, Did you eat the principles of Luopa Mountain like rice in your bowl? Pei Qian freed up his hand and rubbed the short man's head. He said earnestly, My master once said that the principle is the big white bowl. Other external objects are the food inside. As long as the bowl is not thrown away, there will always be food to eat. I can't figure out what principles are. Meili, you're so muddle-headed, you can't figure it out either. So we just need to remember the rules of Luopa Mountain, and there won't be any mistakes. Ju Meili frowned, but soon her brows relaxed. She understood and said softly, Once we talk to Chen Lingjun, we have to give him a parting gift. Anyway, our relationship is so good, so let's not make empty promises. Pei Qian pulled Meili's cheeks and said with a laugh, What are you talking about? Ju Meili chuckled as well. Pei Qian stood on the spot and took a deep breath. Then, he punched a very short distance away and muttered to himself, Pinch a needle with the finger, sweep a large area with the fist, punch like an arrow, punch like a flying sword. Ju Meili asked, What? Pei Qian continued to punch out slowly and said seriously, After the Mad Demon sword art, I created another unique fist art. The incantations were all written by me, and they are extremely powerful. Then, Pei Qian began to spout nonsense. Other than my master's fist technique, there are 2 other fist techniques in the world that are also very strong. One is a self-taught tortoise fist, and the other is a technique that was secretly learned from the Flying Passage sect. Ju Meili didn't think she was stupid, but she was still skeptical. How powerful is this fist technique of yours? Will you be able to fly if you practice martial arts? Pei Qian said in annoyance, That's something only a martial artist at the far roaming realm can do. I'm still too young. I won't be able to do it without a few years of effort. Stomping her foot, Ju Meili said in annoyance, It's been so long, how many melon seeds do you have to eat? Pei Qian said helplessly, It's very easy for you to become an 8th-tier martial artist. Ju Meili was stunned. She held her walking stick and scratched her cheek. But you are Pei Qian. Pei Qian was all smiles. Retracting his fist, he held onto little Meili's head and shook it. You little brain. You don't look big, but why are you so smart? Ju Meili shook her head for a long time, then suddenly sighed. Why isn't the mountain chieftain home yet? Pei Qian smiled. Didn't I tell you? Over at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, because of my master's help in spreading the news, there are many stories about the Mute Lake monster circulating now. That's a whole new world. You're just secretly happy. Ju Meili scratched her cheek again. But I'd rather he stop telling stories and come back sooner. Pei Qian made a face. Are you going to treat my master to pickled fish when he comes home? Ju Meili frowned and said timidly, Not a big bowl, but a small bowl. Pei Qian was happy, but also a little sad. After growing up, it was difficult for him to be like before, with all his worries and worries. He was always like a guest who came and went quickly. In the past, Pei Qian didn't quite understand why his master didn't want him and sister Baoping to grow up quickly. Now, looking at little Meili, Pei Qian understood. Chen Lingjun was about to board the cross-continent ferry. Pei Qian patted Ju Meili's head. Let's go and say goodbye. Remember, Master said that if a friend takes the immortal ferry to travel far away, we can't say that it's a smooth journey. Ju Meili nodded vigorously. I know. A stupid melon seed, Nuanshu, Pei Qian, and little Meili all said goodbye to him. Chen Lingjun was a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, he was also a little happy. However, he didn't want to show his feelings on his face. After Chen Lingjun left, Pei Qian and the other two waited until the ferry passed through the sea of clouds before returning to Luopa Mountain. Chen Nuanshu turned to look at the sea of clouds. Pei Qian said softly, "Don't worry, it's fine." Chen Lingjun might not be serious usually, but is actually very smart. Chen Nuanshu smiled. Pei Qian held the hands of a little girl. Now, Pei Qian's height had surpassed them by a lot. He finally looked like a young girl. Chen Lingjun was in the room on the ferry. With nothing to do, he lay on the table in a daze. In fact, at the crossing of Oxhorn Mountain, Chen Lingjun regretted it the moment he boarded the cross-continent ferry. He really wanted to jump off the ferry and sneak back. Anyway, now that Luopa Mountain was big and had a lot of territory, he could just find a place to hide. Wei Pai would probably be annoyed to see him and might not be willing to talk to old chef and Pei Qian about this. In a few days, he would go to Luopa Mountain to show his face and find a random reason to fool them. He forgot to look at the almanac and pick an auspicious day. He was worried about Yellow Lake Mountain and forgot to go to the Imperial River to say goodbye to his friends in the pugilistic world. There was nothing wrong with concentrating at home, working hard, and cultivating diligently. There was a big bamboo box on the table. In fact, it was rare for Lord Wei Shan to be so generous and lend him something close to him. In the bamboo box, there were many maps of the North Continent. There were maps drawn by the immortals on the mountain, as well as many secret treasures of the imperial court. In addition, there were a lot of messy local chronicles and a few booklets written by Chen Pinggan. They were all things to take note of. In old chef's words, it was as if he had written down everything except where to pee and poop. If he still couldn't succeed in crossing the river, he might as well drown himself. Chen Lingjun was actually still afraid. In the past, when he was at the imperial river of the Huangting nation, he didn't like to move. He acknowledged the imperial river water god as his brother and acted like a tyrant together. When he arrived at Luopa Mountain, he still didn't move. Pei Qian and Xiaomi would occasionally go to Red Candle Town for a stroll. Chen Lingjun only went around the mountains of Luopa Mountain, touring the scenery and chatting with the old immortals. He brought the black snake with him and patrolled the various places in a carefree manner. Ever since the blind old daoist named Zhou Cheng moved from the dragon-riding alley to the Yellow Lake Mountain to cultivate, Chen Lingjun often went there as a guest. They hit it off very well. If bragging really worked, the entire vast world would be their private garden. However, Chen Lingjun now knew that the other party was flattering him so much. It was still because of Chen Pinggan. Chen Lingjun didn't dislike this kind of thing. He quite liked it. No matter how good the wind in Luopa Mountain was, it was inevitable that there would be distant relatives and distant relatives. After all, he and Nuan Shu, that little fool, could be considered the earliest elders of Luopa Mountain. Later on, there were old chef, Pei Qian, Sharu, and the others. The silly center Yuanji, the silly girl Yuan Bao, and the silly Yuan Lai. Because the big fool was Cao Qinglang. Later on, Chen Pinggan kidnapped Xiaomi from the North Continent. Sometimes, Chen Lingjun himself felt that Wei Pai, old chef, and the others looked down on him. He couldn't blame them for having high standards. He really blamed himself for not being ambitious. He liked to eat and wait for death. He bragged and bragged. The more people, the merrier. How good was that? He ran all the way to the North Continent alone. What the hell was he cultivating for? Skeleton Beach, Hemp Sect, Mural City, Sect Master Zhu Quan, 2 honorary consecrators of Luopa Mountain, Mute Lake, Willowjiching, Spring Dew Garden, Cloud City, Jide, the Central Dragon Palace, the westernmost mountain, Lion Peak, Li and his wife, Li Huai's sister, Li Liu. Little Treasure's brother, Li Shisheng. Old Master's friend, a fire deity temple, Taihui Sword Sect's Liu Jinglong, his disciple, Little White Head. Am I going to cultivate for a bright future? I'm going to visit people and give them gifts, okay? I have no choice but to jump on the ferry. Chen Lingjun packed his luggage and slipped from the second floor to the first floor of the ferry. In the end, Wei Pai appeared near the railing of the ferry. Chen Lingjun laughed and said, "Mountain Lord Wei, why are you being so polite? You don't have to send me off." Wei Pai laughed and said, "The entire North Peak continent is under my jurisdiction. Have you forgotten?" Chen Lingjun ran over to massage Lord Shan's arm and said, "How would I dare to forget? Even if I have to pee, I'll hold it in. I'm afraid I'll taint the great rivers and mountains of the North Peak." Wei Pai said, "The North Peak Crown Prince's Mountain is located at the northernmost tip of the Aquarius continent. I'll greet the mountain god and watch the ferry leave. It won't be too late for you to jump then. I won't care. You can take your time to return. As for whether you'll go ashore in the East Peak continent or Ganju Mountain, it's up to you." Chen Lingjun was dumbfounded. The prosperous Clear Breeze city had been singing and dancing for hundreds of years. The dynasties had changed, the mountains and rivers had changed, but the Clear Breeze city that was built at the foot of the mountain had remained unmoved. All the emperors and monarchs had always been respectful to the Shu family. Because of the Shu family's ancestor, the Shu family was able to sit on the Fox country, which was equivalent to half a blessed land. It was rumored that the fox immortal that the Shu family's ancestor met had 7 tails, but no one knew if there was an additional one now. The fox skin beauties produced by the Clear Breeze city's Shu family were expensive, but they were rare and in short supply. It was a specialty of the Aquarius continent. As the number of cross-continent ferry ships in the North Continent increased, the Clear Breeze city's Shu family became more and more wealthy. Especially a few years ago, the Shu family's patriarch changed the ancestral law and allowed the fox country to activate the mirror flower, water moon, causing the price of a fox skin talisman to double. The Shu family hired a master painter to draw the 4 beauties painting and the 18 ladies painting. They were either meticulously engraved or copied. Along with the scattered 4 marquises and folding fans, they were all sold out the moment they were released. Some of the immortals on the mountain who were not on good terms with the Clear Breeze city said sarcastically, "The Shu family was only short of selling erotic paintings. If Shu Hun dared to sell them, he would be a true hero." They purposely belittled Shu Hun as a man who rolled in a pile of women. However, this man was indeed a true nascent Soul Realm military cultivator. After obtaining the strange Swansea armor, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. His combat power was extraordinary. He was one of the few people below the upper 5 realms in the Aquarius continent with outstanding killing power. In a private room of a restaurant in the downtown area of the Clear Breeze city, a young man continued to eat. A scholar in a green robe had already put down his chopsticks and got up to stand by the window. He looked at the bustling crowd outside. There were indeed many good-looking women. Liu Kai-cheng waved his folding fan and smiled. This couple in the Clear Breeze city, one concentrates on cultivation while the other manages the household to earn money. They are a perfect match. The young man just buried his head in eating. Liu Kai-cheng rarely moved his chopsticks but ordered a large table of dishes. There was a lot of food left on the table. Liu Kai-cheng turned to look at the young man and asked with a smile, "Ji Yu Kan, you didn't say why you came here and deliberately left Seng Yi and Ma Duyi out. Can you tell me now?" Ji Yu Kan wanted to talk to someone, so he put down his chopsticks and swallowed the food. He looked up and said, "I have a friend who was almost beaten to death by a man named Lu Zhengchun. This Lu Zhengchun is a descendant of the Lu clan on Fortune Street. He seems to be doing well in the Shu clan in the Clear Breeze city. In the Pearl Grotto Heaven, the Song, Li, Zhao, and Lu were the top families of the 4 great clans. However, the Lu clan in the small town had too much to do with the destroyed dynasty, so they had the most miserable ending. After the Pearl Grotto Heaven fell, the Lu clan in the small town had no achievements to speak of. Only Lu Zhengchun had followed Mistress Shu of the Clear Breeze city and left the town together. The Shu family had treated him well and had given him quite a lot of cultivation resources, and had even given him the status of a direct disciple of the ancestral hall as a protective talisman. All of this had been given to Mistress Lu. Liu Kaicheng was not interested in Lu Zhengchun. He just asked curiously, someone like you also has friends? Ji Yukan nodded and said, yes, I do. Liu Kaicheng smiled and said, in fact, there is only one Chen Pinggan. Ji Yukan shook his head and said, since I was a child, he has never treated me as a friend. The age gap between us is too big. I am the same. I can be considered half a relative. As for Liu Xianyang, who is more generous than the sky, he is close to me only because of Chen Pinggan. Otherwise, he and I have never been on the same path. We were not in the past, and we will not be in the future. We can barely be considered friends. When Liu Xianyang returned from the Chen clan in the South Soro continent, he should be the direct disciple of Wan Qian of the Dragon Spring swordsmanship sect. Liu Xianyang was taken away because his ancestor was the tombkeeper of the Chen clan. There was one thing about Liu Xianyang that Ji Yukan admired the most. He was born to do as the Romans do. He never had any situation where he was not acclimatized. As for himself, after arriving at the Bookslip Lake, even his greatest strength, patience, had been completely lost. Ji Yukan looked back at the seemingly glorious years on the verdant canyon island and found that he was walking on the road to death step by step. Being young was not an excuse at all. Ji Yukan looked at the dishes on the table and continued to pick up the chopsticks to eat. Liu Kaicheng suddenly said, when you go to the White Emperor city in the future, you should break these relationships if you can. Ji Yukan looked as usual. He just ate without saying anything. Liu Kaicheng didn't think that he could change Ji Yukan's temperament. He was afraid that it would depend on his senior brother's teaching methods. So, he changed the topic. What do you mean by doing okay? Since he is the same age as you, is he a Jindan sword cultivator? Or a nascent soul chi cultivator? Ji Yukan said, now he is a level 4 chi cultivator. Within 10 years, there is hope for him to reach the cave realm. He helps the Shu clan to manage a small part of the business in the Fox country. If his cultivation is not fast, he can use the immortal money to make up for it. Liu Kaicheng put away the folding fan and knocked on his head. He said with a smile, my future junior brother, are you kidding me or telling a joke? Ji Yukan looked calm. He didn't drink, ate slowly, and liked to chew slowly. If I have to run away after killing someone, can I really have a stable place to stay in this life? Liu Kaicheng couldn't help but laugh and shook his head. Is a good-for-nothing with such a weak cultivation worth you killing him and running away? I'm very easy to talk to. Just nod and I'll help you solve it. It's just Shu Han. He is not even in the upper 5 realms. It's a small matter. Ji Yukan asked, what if? Why bother? Liu Kaicheng was speechless. Ji Yukan put down his chopsticks and said with a smile, but if I really attack my mortal enemy, I have to make sure that no one can even collect his corpse. Secondly, others couldn't find fault with him. As for others, there were only 2 types. One was Chen Pinggan and the others. If he had to make a choice, he didn't have to care about the latter. In short, Chen Pinggan could forget about completely cutting ties with him in this life. Liu Kaicheng smiled brightly. The more he looked at this kid, the more he liked him. It was the first time that she had become a Dao protector. However, she was willing to do it and felt very comfortable. This made Liu Kaicheng want to take him in as a disciple. Ji Yukan asked, if I really become your junior brother, can I learn the best magic arts and divine powers? Liu Kaicheng couldn't help laughing. White Emperor City is very rich. If you become my junior brother, of course you can learn whatever you want. But it's hard to say if you can learn it. Ji Yukan said, I want to learn all of them. Liu Kaicheng pointed at Ji Yukan with his folding fan and said with a smile, you are young and ignorant. You are dreaming. It wasn't that he didn't know Ji Yukan's excellent cultivation talent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have thought of taking him to the central divine continent as a stepping stone to return to White Emperor City. However, White Emperor City established by his senior brother was not an ordinary Taoist field. It was true that Liu Kaicheng had a deep hatred for his senior brother. But putting these old grudges aside, his senior brother was indeed Liu Kaicheng. This chapter is not finished. Please turn the page. He was the most respected person in his life. Then there was the great celestial master of Longhu Mountain, and then Kui Dong, who played the rosy cloud chess game with his senior brother. There were only 3 of them. Liu Kai-cheng couldn't help but remind him, my senior brother's temperament is unpredictable. You may reach the sky in 1 step, or you may become an ordinary person. Even worse, you may lose several lifetimes. Don't think too lightly of it. In order to find a potential candidate for a closed-door disciple, senior brother had stared at that pitiful worm for 600 years. For the pitiful worm himself, his 8 lifetimes were actually all for the sake of the final disciple of White Emperor City. In the end, that person reached his 9th life, but for some reason, senior brother still abandoned him. Senior brother is best at multitasking, cultivation, playing chess, managing White Emperor City, refining artifacts, taking in disciples. There is almost nothing that senior brother is not good at. And he does everything calmly and flawlessly. Ji Yukan nodded and said, then I have found a good master. Liu Kai-cheng laughed. Ji Yukan stood up and paid the bill. Liu Kai-cheng suddenly said in surprise, what a beautiful girl. Ji Yukan didn't care. Liu Kai-cheng said in surprise, not common, not common. She has a great background. If I'm not wrong, that silver gourd is one of the 7 highest-ranked blade-strengthening gourds. Ji Yukan frowned, walked quickly to the window, and looked at the young woman who was leading the horse slowly. She was dressed in red, with a wine gourd and a narrow knife hanging from her waist. It was Li Baoping. Why did she come to Qingfeng City? Ji Yukan said, we are not in a hurry to leave. Let's wait until she leaves Qingfeng City. No matter what happens during this period, I owe you a favor. Liu Kai-cheng asked doubtfully, do you know this woman? Ji Yukan was silent. Liu Kai-cheng counted with his fingers and suddenly cursed. He quickly covered his nose, but blood still oozed from between his fingers. Liu Kai-cheng looked dignified and restrained his cynicism. He said in a deep voice, don't get involved. Just take it as a suggestion from me to your future junior brother. Ji Yukan stared at the back of the woman in red and said, if you want to get involved. If something really happens, you save her and I will take care of myself. Liu Kai-cheng said angrily, what do you want? Ji Yukan closed his eyes and began to calculate all the inside stories about Qingfeng City. Liu Kai-cheng leaned against the window and said self-deprecatingly, alas, I have a hard life. Before Zheng Dafeng went to the Yang family's shop, he went to the wine shop. He was familiar with the woman who was selling wine, but he was still not close to her. The woman was shrewish, and the people in the town called her Huang Enyang. They had long forgotten her real name. In the early years, there was a drunk man who knocked on the widow's door at night. The woman opened the door and threw a kitchen knife at him, almost killing him. After that, the man had to pay a large sum of money. But after that, the man who squatted on the wall and talked dirty and climbed over the wall to steal clothes disappeared. It was not worth sacrificing one's life for the second son. Moreover, Huang Enyang did not mind the dirty talk in the wine shop at all. Most of the time, it was the men begging for mercy. When she served the dishes and wine, she touched the hands of the drunkards, only to be kicked and scolded by her. This was a good deal. If it was the more handsome young men who came to drink, the treatment would be different. If they were more daring, they would not even get a supercilious look. In the end, it was hard to say who was taking advantage of who. The business of the wine shop was booming and it was overcrowded. Master Wan, who had transformed from a blacksmith to an immortal, often came here to buy wine. After a while, Huang Enyang's wine shop became the golden signboard of the small town. Many foreigners were willing to come here and take advantage of the immortal aura of Saint Ruan, the chief consecrator of the Li dynasty. The business of the wine shop and the pastry shop in the Riding Dragon Alley were doing very well. Zheng Dafeng stood at the door of the shop and was a little worried. With so many sloppy men staring at her, he guessed that Huang Enyang was shy and would not dare to flirt with him. Now that the shop was bigger and they hired 2 workers to do odd jobs, Zheng Dafeng felt that the taste of wine was not as good as before. It was completely different from the time when the business of the shop was poor and he was a big customer here. Huang Enyang was leaning over the counter. Every time she saw him, it was as if she saw her man coming home. Every time she would sway her waist, walk around the counter, and call him Big Brother Feng. Sometimes she would pinch his arm and curse him in a low voice that he was a heartless bastard. He almost turned into a piece of peach blossom cake. She still had to hold his arm and walk into the shop with him. How could there be such a heavy hidden weapon in the world? It was very hurtful. Zheng Dafeng was afraid of hurting his arm. Every time he sat down, he had to rub his arm for a long time before he could lift the wine bowl. 7 or 8 tables were full. Zheng Dafeng planned to come again when there were fewer people. He did not expect that there would be a table full of local men. One of them waved and said, "Hey, hey, hey, isn't this Brother Dafeng? Come sit here. Let's make things clear first. You're treating today. Every time there's a wedding or funeral, you've freeloaded a lot of wine away. Now you're guarding the door for the immortals on the mountain. How extravagant. As expected of a man, only when he has money in his pocket can he straighten his back." The stooped Zheng Dafeng jogged over and sat down on the same bench as that person. He smiled and said, "Why would I treat you? I'm just saving money for my wife. I'm not like you, Big Eyes Liu. You sold 2 ancestral mansions and bought 2 mansions in one go in the provincial capital in addition to several shops. How grand do you think you are? My treat. Isn't this a slap to the face of a rich man like you, Big Eyeball Liu?" Big Eyeball Liu was a common saying. It meant that he could not see people. The man with the surname Liu was not angry. He was used to bickering with Zheng Dafeng. The words between them were like a drizzle. Whoever got angry would lose. The man did not come to the small town often in recent years. The 2 ancestral houses that took up quite a lot of space had been sold long ago. He did not cherish the past. In the past, he would still pass by when he went to visit the graves. Later on, he did not even bother to visit the graves. It was too far away. During the Qingming festival, he would burn more yellow paper on the roadside outside the big house in the provincial capital. The man lowered his voice and said, "Do you know that the widow in Mud Bottle Alley is doing well now? She's really rich now." The man gave him a thumbs up. In terms of family wealth, that pretty widow can be considered this. The man immediately regretted it. "If I had known, I would have bought more back then. Otherwise, not to mention a few houses and shops in the provincial capital, even 2 or 3 streets would have taken my surname." Zheng Dafeng poured himself a bowl of wine. If Huang Enyang did not personally bring it to his mouth, it would not taste good. Zheng Dafeng raised his bowl first and toasted everyone at the table. He drank it all in one gulp. The few people at the table were about the same age as Big Eyeball Liu in the past. Now, they all had their own family businesses in the provincial capital. They were living a life of luxury that they did not even dare to dream of in the past. The old woman who came first and the foxy concubines who came later was always in a state of chaos. In addition, there were also some clever servant girls who had some thoughts. On normal days, it was livelier than the new year. Zheng Dafeng toasted. Other than a relatively simple and honest acquaintance who returned a bowl of wine, the rest did not touch it and pretended not to see it. Zheng Dafeng did not care about this. He was just here to freeload wine. Why would he care about his face? He hurriedly poured another bowl of wine. Only then did Zheng Dafeng wipe his mouth and smile. "I'm not too sure. Back then, I wasn't very close to the Jiyu family's wife. You know that." Big Eyeball Liu joked. "I'm curious. Both of you are pretty widows. The Jiyu family's wife in Mud Bottle Alley has a soft personality. Why don't you hook up with her? Why do you like Huang Enyang?" Zheng Dafeng smiled. The man on the other bench had a face full of shrewdness. He was famous for being stingy and stingy back then. He seemed to be careless and asked casually, "Dafeng, I heard that you're hanging out with that kid in Mud Bottle Alley now? Look at you, you're getting worse and worse. In your early years, you were guarding the gate and did not care about anything. Now, you're working for a junior who's younger than you. Aren't you embarrassed? Besides, looking at you now, you don't look like you've made a fortune. Why don't I give you a hand? We've been good brothers for so many years. Don't you have a little run-down house in the east of the town? I'll help you find a rich buyer in the capital." Zheng Dafeng started to pour wine again. He waved his hand and said, "No, That's my little house. I'll just lie there obediently. If I fart with my butt facing the east, even the paper windows in the west will shake. It's not worth much. The man glanced at Big Eyeball Liu. The latter immediately persuaded, Brother Darfeng, there's money everywhere in the capital. To be honest, if there's a string of copper coins on the ground, if it's not gold or silver, I wouldn't even want to bend my back. If you sell that yellow mud house and settle down in the capital, what kind of beautiful wife can't you get? Besides, if you go to the capital, all of us old brothers will be there. We can help each other. Isn't it better than you guarding the gate for someone else? Zheng Dafeng started to stir. He did not refuse and dragged it on. The next time they meet, he could still freeload wine. In the end, everyone at the table had worn out Zheng Dafeng's patience. When they left, they did not pay the bill. Zheng Dafeng called a familiar face to take a seat. The familiar face called his own acquaintance to drink. Then, Zheng Dafeng wanted to run away. Unexpectedly, the woman's eyes were sharp. She smiled and said, Brother Dafeng, do you lack money in your pocket or in your pants? If you lack money and can't pay for the wine, with our relationship, we can just waive the bill. But if you lack something, then I can't help you. Zheng Dafeng did not stop walking. He pretended not to hear. Huang Enyang slammed the table. Zheng Dafeng, get your ass back here. If my tofu is brave enough, then you can eat as much as you want. But you dare to owe me for the wine? Did the heavens borrow your guts? The people of the town had always been simple. Zheng Dafeng turned around and sauntered to the counter. He laughed softly. If I lack money, I lack money. When will I not lack money? Huang Enyang, don't you know? Brother Dafeng is full of vigor. His reputation is not undeserved. Huang Enyang leaned against the counter and munched on sunflower seeds. Why don't you gamble now? Did you go into the mountains and fall into a pig's nest? Zheng Dafeng smiled mischievously. I gamble for fun. I never ask for money. Have you ever seen me win? Then, Zheng Dafeng said earnestly, tens of millions from gambling is just a plot of land by the river. The money of life and death goes around in circles for 60 years. One skill, craftsmanship, passed down for 3 generations. Palm land, crop money, thousands of years. Huang Enyang rolled her eyes. You're the only one who likes to pretend to be a scholar. Zheng Dafeng glanced at the woman's clothes and extended his hand. Sister, what kind of cloth is that? It's so sturdy. Let Brother Dafeng take a look. The woman only munched on sunflower seeds and did not dodge. She did not believe that this guy would dare to touch the cloth on her chest. Sure enough, Zheng Dafeng resentfully retracted his hand and pretended to find a way out for himself. He wiped the table and complained, Sister, it's not that I'm nagging you, but you don't even know how to find a diligent worker. Look at this table, it's so oily that even a fly wouldn't be able to move its feet. If you're not careful, wouldn't you be crushed to death by 2 mountains? The woman only sneered. You have the nerve to call me sister? Count with your fingers. How long has it been since the shop took care of business? Zheng Dafeng leaned on the counter and glanced at the noisy table. He laughed. What's there to take care of now? You don't need my few bowls of wine. The woman took advantage of the stooped man's turn to look elsewhere. Her eyes reddened, but she quickly covered it up. It was as if many years had passed in the blink of an eye. When she first opened this shop, she was still a young woman. She was even prettier than she was now. She didn't have wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, and her hands were very tender. Thinking back to those days, when she mustered up her courage to serve wine to the customers, almost all of the drunkards' eyes would glance at her chest. Only one young man also looked at her chest, but he also liked to look at her small hands. He would say a lot of pleasing words, just like the words in books. She didn't really understand what he said, but it made people feel happy. The reason why the shop was able to survive the early bleak years was because of this man in front of her. It was not as simple as drinking wine. It was just that when she was at her best, she was embarrassed by those words. Now that she was older and knew more about the ways of the world, she was not as beautiful as before. She only felt that Zheng Dafeng was different from ordinary men. His eyes and mouth were not honest, but his hands were honest. The woman only found out much later that this was a truly honest man. Zheng Dafeng turned his head. Same old rules. Put it on the tab. Oh right, give Brother Dafeng another bowl. The woman slammed the bowl on the table and personally poured the wine into the bowl. She faced the wine jar. When she turned around and bent over, she knew that the man was definitely looking at her. Huang Enyang poured the wine and leaned against the counter again. She looked at the man who was sipping the wine and said softly, "Big eyeball Liu, this group of people is after your house. Be careful. Maybe he came back to town this time because of you." Zheng Dafeng nodded. "You really know how to care for people. I'm talking to you about serious matters." Huang Enyang's tone became slightly more serious. She frowned and said, "Don't be careless. I heard that after this group of people became rich, they started doing business in the state capital. When money is in the hands of good people, it's courage. When it's in the pockets of these people, it's evil. Your shabby shop is small, but it's in a good location. Walk east of the town and you'll find the immortal graveyard. Now it's a martial temple. Over the years, how many officials have gone there to burn incense and worship? How grand is it? Don't you know? But I have to give you a piece of advice. Once you find a suitable buyer, sell it. Don't hide it too much. Be careful that the Yamen wants to buy it from you. When the time comes, the price will be too low. Are you going to sell it or not? If you don't sell it, how can you live peacefully in the future?" Zheng Dafeng grunted in agreement. Therefore, when it came to dirty and troublesome matters, there were many in the marketplace. Every household, who didn't have chicken shit or dog shit? But when it came to intelligence and kindness, there were also many. Every household, who didn't have a few bowls of clean rice? The woman suddenly felt sad. "I'm getting old." Zheng Dafeng smiled. "That's right. Your son is now a scholar. I heard that he has the nickname of Little Shotsai. What do you think? Your big brother Da Feng never lies to you. That kid looks like a good material. He's a serious scholar. The spring festival couplets in the wine shop were written by that kid, and they look very good. Sister, you can just wait to enjoy life in the future. The family heirloom isn't about money, it's about doing good deeds." Huang Enyang glanced at him. Zheng Dafeng pretended to be shy and blocked her gaze with his wine bowl. "Sister, your gaze isn't very proper. Brother Dafeng looks like he's naked." Huang Enyang was helpless. She really had to thank him for teaching the child. In the early years, when she was a widow with a child, she really wanted to cut off her own flesh to let the child eat, drink, and wear warm clothes. When the child grew older, she couldn't bear to scold or beat him. The child became wild and even dared to skip school. She only felt that it wasn't good, but she didn't know how to teach him. She tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen. Every time, the child would agree verbally, but he would often go down the river to catch fish and snakes in the mountains. Later on, Zheng Dafeng was drinking and among a bunch of vulgar words, he hid a sentence about how to earn money. Huang Enyang listened to him and gave him a good beating. Soon, the child became obedient. Huang Enyang suddenly said, "Two minds at the same time, no 3 no 4, 5 no 6 people, a total mess, 8 or 9 out of 10, a coward." This was what Zheng Dafeng used to scold people in the wine shop. In fact, it didn't have much strength. It was too sour and didn't hurt or itch. However, Huang Enyang found it interesting and remembered it. Compared to these women who scolded first and then scratched their faces, as well as those country bumpkins, it was a different way of scolding people. Zheng Dafeng pretended not to understand and instead began to feel sorry for himself. "It's chilly to be single. How poor can I be? Rats starve and have to move. Mosquitoes and lice can barely drink a few mouthfuls of wine. Once I've saved enough money, which girl would be willing to visit me?" Huang Enyang smiled and asked, "How old is the girl?" Zheng Dafeng glanced at the woman and laughed. Her age can be neither too old nor too young, but she still has to be old when she needs to be. Huang Enyang threw a handful of melon seeds at the man. Zheng Dafeng dodged. A bowl of wine would eventually be finished. He put down the bowl and patted his face. What a good saying. Drunk like a whale sucking in hundreds of rivers, drunk like a jade mountain about to collapse. Sister, you're in luck. Huang Enyang sneered. You're a wooden club. Drunk and run away. This chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Drown in the latrine, eat until you die, it's all up to you. Zheng Dafeng said, let's go, I'll definitely pay you back in the future. Huang Enyang suddenly asked, going on a long trip again? Zheng Dafeng said, it's not too far. The blessed land of lotus roots was near Luo Po Mountain, but it was also far away. Huang Enyang lowered her voice. Haven't you suffered enough? What's so good about the outside world? Zheng Dafeng turned his head and smiled. I once read a sentence in a book. Huang Xinyang's house is full of flowers, but it's not as good as Huang Enyang. Huang Enyang asked, can't you just not leave? If you owe me money for the wine, then so be it. Zheng Dafeng shook his head and left. The woman watched as the man with his arm around her gradually disappeared into the distance. She couldn't see him clearly anymore. Zheng Dafeng came to the Yang family's shop to help out temporarily. The precocious junior sister, Su Biao, and the unenlightened junior brother, Shi Lingshan, had both left to gain experience. Currently, there was only one Yang family disciple looking after the shop. Zheng Dafeng was much more thick-skinned now. Even if his master still didn't like him, he just stayed at the front of the shop and didn't bother the old man in the backyard. As he neared the shop, Zheng Dafeng quietly dispersed the smell of alcohol on his body and entered the shop. The young shop assistant was dozing off. When he heard the sound of Zheng Dafeng moving a small stool, he woke up and went back to sleep. The Yang family disciple had been annoyed by Zheng Dafeng for a long time and didn't want to have anything to do with him. He was just a bachelor who went on a long trip, lost half his life outside, and came back dejectedly to continue guarding the door. How good could he be? If it wasn't for the Yang family's old master saying a few words, a sloppy man like Zheng Dafeng wouldn't even be able to rely on his relationship with the old man in the backyard to help out at the shop. The Yang family had not been doing too well in recent years. Even the descendants of the Yang family were not doing too well. In the past, apart from a few of the 4 surnames and 10 clans who had directly moved to the capital of the Great Li dynasty, as long as there were still some people left in their hometown, each one was doing better than the other in the provincial capital, raking in large amounts of money every day. Therefore, those who were young and had some ambition were more envious and passionate. The old master of the Yang family, on the other hand, was secretly cold-hearted. He was unwilling to care about this group of descendants who were not doing well, so he let them do as they wished. The old master's only confidence was old Yang's prescription in the backyard. However, this business was handled by only 3 people in the entire family. It was just 3 generations. Without the worry of not having enough descendants, it was enough. When there were many descendants, the head of the family liked to give more to those who were truly capable. Those who were poor would be raised and wouldn't starve to death. Those who could earn money would only be richer. Zheng Dafeng moved a stool and sat at the entrance of the shop. Basking in the sun didn't cost any money. He didn't need to be tanned. Admiring the flowers and moon on the mountain and joining in the bustle at the bottom of the mountain were 2 good things. Zheng Dafeng raised his head and looked at the sun. See everything? He looked at it for a long time. It had been like this since he was young. After looking at it for a long time, it didn't hurt his eyes and he didn't feel anything. Later on, when Zheng Dafeng learned boxing and martial arts, he didn't think too much about it. Zheng Dafeng retracted his gaze and patted his knee. Last year, I hoped that this year would be better. This year, it's still a lousy cotton-padded jacket. This year, I hope that next year will be better. Next year. The young man at the counter muttered, so noisy. Zheng Dafeng turned his head and smiled. Are you dead? The young man glared. How can you say that? Zheng Dafeng looked puzzled. If I don't use my mouth, do I use my buttocks? The young man slammed the table. Zheng Dafeng, you better watch your mouth. Zheng Dafeng smiled. He raised his hand and gestured a few times. He said patiently, lower your voice. The tables of us commoners are either used to place rice bowls or incense burners. It doesn't matter what other things are used for. For example, the abacus. It doesn't matter. So don't slam the table. It's disrespectful to the gods of heaven and earth. That's unacceptable. The young man sneered. Don't King spout nonsense here. You're a cripple with a rotten hunchback. You'll be a lowly watchdog your whole life. Do you really think this shop is your own home? Stabbing someone with a sharp knife was worse than stabbing someone with a sharp horn. However, Zheng Dafeng didn't spar with his senior brother Li the most. Instead, he sparred with his mouth. There weren't many commoners in the town, but there were many experts in the art of talking. Clay Bottle Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley were places full of outstanding people and experts. That taciturn Chen Pinggan didn't make any moves during his youth. In fact, this skill was accumulating internal energy day after day. Zheng Dafeng was immediately happy. Su Dian was too stubborn, Shi Lingshan was too simple-minded. Finally, there was someone who knew how to talk. Zheng Dafeng moved a stool closer to the door and laughed. Yang Xia, I heard that you love to burn incense at the Tiefu River Water God Temple. Don't you know the real rules of burning incense? Let's not talk about other things. For this kind of thing, do you have to pay attention to the rules? Do you know why you have to hold the incense with your left hand? Do you know that you're left-handed? If that's the case, it won't be good. The young man named Yang Xia was a little shaken, but his face was still full of disdain. He was too lazy to talk. Zheng Dafeng laughed. 15 loves the woman next door. 30 loves other people's children. 50, 60 is his good daughter-in-law. The third branch of the Yang family has good family style. Yang Xia's face immediately flushed red. He picked up the abacus and threw it at that bastard. The head of the Yang family's third branch indeed had a bad reputation in Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley. He was the kind of rich person who didn't have a knot in his belt. Zheng Dafeng reached out and caught the abacus. This is your Yang family's money-making tool. It can't be lost. If it's broken, who will pay for it? I'm a barefoot man, and you're a little rich. Even if you throw dirty water at me, will it work? Who do you think will pay in the end? You're waiting to wade into muddy waters and go to the provincial capital to earn that heartless fortune. In my opinion, it's better not to go. The rise and fall of a family depends on etiquette and righteousness, not on wealth or poverty. Study hard. If you can't do it, give birth to a few more children. There's still hope for you to rely on your descendants to bring glory to your ancestors. Yang Xia's face turned ashen. He was so angry that his whole body trembled. Zheng Dafeng shook his head and raised a hand. Don't fight with me. I don't know how to control my strength. If I punch you, you'll probably start practicing drunken boxing. The kind that doesn't need a teacher. Yang Xia was about to walk around the counter. It wasn't a fight. It was time to go home. Suddenly, the curtain was lifted. The old man said, Yang Xia, you're competing with a doorman. Don't you find it embarrassing? Yang Xia snorted coldly. However, now that he had a way out, he still had to leave the Yang family's shop. He just slowed his steps and walked more steadily. When Yang Xia stepped over the threshold and finally disappeared into the distance, old Yang, who rarely walked to the front of the shop, came to the door and said, Is it fun to compete with a piece of trash? Does he understand human language? Zheng Dafeng had already stood up and straightened his back as much as possible. When an old man took in a disciple, it was of utmost importance to respect his master and his teachings. Zheng Dafeng followed the old man to the backyard. The old man lifted the curtain. When he passed the threshold, he casually put him down. Zheng Dafeng gently supported him. When he passed, he still supported him and gently put him down. Old Yang sat on the steps of the main room. He tapped his pipe and picked up the tobacco pouch at his waist. Soon, he began to puff again. The thin bamboo pipe had been given to him by someone else, while the tobacco leaf had been given to him by that little brat Li Huai. After all these years, the pipe had changed from its original verdant color to a faint bamboo yellow. Old Yang said, It's just a tiny lotus root paradise. Even if you go, what's the point? Zheng Dafeng said, It's still a vast world. Old Yang gave his disciple a sidelong glance. Being too smart was never a good thing. Zheng Dafeng helplessly said, I'll listen to master. Great. This time, he really did have to go on a long journey. Old Yang said, when you get there, you'll have to start all over again. The road will be even harder to walk, but as long as the road isn't hard to walk, there will be more people. There's a reason why Fan Junmaro was made Mountain Lord Nanyu and not you. In any case, Zheng Dafeng just listened to the teachings. Old Yang asked, why do you think the Confucians opened up a fifth world at this time? You have to know that the world was discovered long ago. Zheng Dafeng replied, it's to prevent the 100 schools of thought from not helping when the war is imminent. Instead, there'll be a hindrance. Now that a world has appeared out of thin air, we'll fight for it if we have the ability. Old Yang asked again, do you know why the vast world is the most tolerant of Taoists and Buddhists? Is there a place for the Confucian academies and Buddhist temples to stand in the green world? Zheng Dafeng's expression was solemn. He definitely couldn't think of an answer to this question by himself. Old Yang waved his hand and dispersed the smoke. He asked, I once scolded the saints of the 3 schools of thought as Pishio, right? Zheng Dafeng nodded. The old man smiled and said, I just don't know who will be the first to slap me. Now that his master was on his side, he didn't mind saying more. However, Zheng Dafeng missed the bleak days when his master didn't talk much. Zheng Dafeng was suddenly stunned. Old Yang sneered and said, you finally remembered. You thought that you weren't as smart as Li and were never convinced. Li had once reminded Zheng Dafeng to think carefully about why his master never spoke more than 10 words to him. Back then, Zheng Dafeng felt that his master felt that he was an eyesore and wasn't willing to speak more. 10. Martial artist 10 realms. Back then, as a martial artist at the peak of the far-wandering realm, he had traveled south to Old Dragon City and guarded that dusty shop. Later on, he had met Chen Pingan and broken through. He had really almost, broken through 2 bottlenecks consecutively and directly advanced from level 8 to level 10. Old Yang sneered and said, if you had the ability to make me speak more, you would have reached realm 10 long ago. There wouldn't be so much trouble now. You wandered to the east and wandered to the west, asking questions to Qi Jingchun, chatting with that old man Yarrow, so what? Are you realm 10 or realm 11 now? Yes, multiplied by 2, it's almost enough. Zheng Dafeng was still more used to such a master. However, Zheng Dafeng rarely talked back. Mr. Qi and old Yarrow are still very knowledgeable. It's my own poor comprehension that can't learn the subtleties. Did I say that your comprehension is good? Old Yang twisted out some tobacco shreds, his face full of sarcasm. What's the most damaging thing about a house? The window paper is torn. The door is rotten. Is that a big deal? Even a poor family in Clay Bottle Lane and Apricot Blossom Lane can't afford this little bit of repair money. Let's just say that Chen Pingan's ancestral house can be replaced with a new one every time a child goes up or down the mountain with a hatchet. No matter how well you learn other people's principles and think you understand them thoroughly, it's just the work of putting up door gods and hanging spring festival couplets. In just a year, the wind and rain will weaken it. Zheng Dafeng said, it's changing beams and pillars. It's making a big fuss. Old Yang nodded and said, do you think it's so easy to learn other people's principles? You have to tear down the original beams and pillars. That's the real meaning of cultivating the mind. You have to endure it when you're competing with yourself. Old Yang sighed. Let's not talk about the distant ones. Let's talk about Qi Jingchun. He's been in Liju Grotto Heaven for 60 years, but he still can't think of a great Tao that's right and proper. Look at Chen Pingan. How many principles do you think he knows? Not many. Just a few. What kind of person am I? How should one understand the world through scholarship? How should one establish oneself in the world? How should one live in harmony with the world? How should one live better? Just these 3 things and a few principles. Whether one is a good person or not, many little things make an ocean. Is it complicated to be a truly good person? It's very simple, but is it easy to do? It's very difficult. Old Yang could roughly guess Qi Jingchuan's knowledge in the past. The Daoist ancestor once said that losing the Tao was followed by virtue, losing virtue was followed by benevolence, and losing benevolence was followed by righteousness. Qi Jingchun was probably trying to think of a way to solve this problem. She might be trying to push it back. It was not the order, but it was the order. In fact, Qi Jingchun's concerns were even greater than this. Unfortunately, it was all in the past. Zheng Dafeng asked, "Then what about me?" Old Yang asked in return, "The master leads the way. Do I need the master to teach me how to eat and poop?" Zheng Dafeng said, "I'll go to that world. I'll think about it carefully." Old Man Yang raised his hand and shook his sleeves, throwing out the small temple that he had refined and put away. The old man waved his hand, and specks of golden light flashed and disappeared into Zheng Dafeng's forehead. Zheng Dafeng did not move. Old Yang said, "It's returned to its owner. Leave it with me. It's not an eyesore. I won't look at it anyway. It's just annoying." The golden light was Zheng Dafeng's soul. Zheng Dafeng stood up and bowed. "Disciple thanks master for teaching and protecting me." Old Yang puffed out a cloud of smoke. Zheng Dafeng immediately sat down. It was not very respectful to just stand like that. Zheng Dafeng turned his head. Not long after, a young man in a scholarly robe walked in. He carried a bamboo chest and held a walking stick. Zheng Dafeng's face was tense. The travel-worn young man walked quickly to Old Yang's side. He squatted down and rubbed his shoulders. He said, don't worry. Your muscles and bones are still strong like a young man. It's not too much to get a wife. Dafeng, you're really something. How can you be a disciple and not help your master find a wife? It's hard to find a wife, but is it hard to find a wife?" Old Yang did not care. Zheng Dafeng was not surprised. In the entire world, probably only Li Huai dared to treat the old man like this. Old Yang asked, "You're going to Mount Cloud Forest and Deer Academy to study again?" Li Huai sat down on the ground. "This is secondary. I'm going to fight with Pei Qian." "Of course it's a fight. We haven't seen each other for a few years. She and I have accumulated a lot. Isn't this a battle at the square outside the ancestral hall of Jise Peak? It's a Jianghu event." She went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi and met at the academy. She said she had to pack up her treasures and fight later. Li Huai said regretfully, "It's a pity that Li Baoping went to travel alone. It's fine if I lose to her, but if I win against her, without Li Baoping's help, I'm afraid I won't be able to leave Luopa Mountain." Zheng Dafeng laughed. "There's someone you're afraid of?" Li Huai nodded. "Yes, I'm afraid of Mr. Qi, Baoping, Pei Qian. There are so many teachers in the academy. I'm afraid of them all." Zheng Dafeng joked, "Is Chen Pinggan afraid?" Li Huai thought seriously and said, "With him, I'm not afraid." Fulu Street. There was the scholar Li Shisheng who traveled to North Continent. Li Baoping who was studying in the Cliff Academy of the Great Sui Kingdom. Zhao Yarrow who went to Central Continent. Peach Leaf Alley. There was Xie Ling, a direct disciple of the Dragon Spring Sword sect. Dao Ya, a servant of the Wei family who went to the capital of Dali. There was also Lin Shuyi who cultivated and studied peacefully. Clay Bottle Alley. There was Chen Pinggan who went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Ji Yu Kan who started a storm at Bookslip Lake. There was also Song Jisin who became the king of Dali. There was also the servant Ji Qiu. Apricot Flower Alley. There was Ma Kushuan who was known as the young genius leader of the continent. There was also Li Liu and Li Huai. There was Dong Shuijing who was a businessman. There was also the shop of the Yang family. There was also the shop of the Su family. Rock Spirit Mountain. Those who were the luckiest in the town were usually the ones with strong foundations. For example, Li Huai and Ji Yu Kan. Back then, the one who had the most leaves on the old locust tree was actually Ji Yu Kan. No one knew. Back then, the little slug had packed a big bag of leaves. When he returned to Clay Bottle Alley and was reminded by Chen Pinggan, he realized that there were so many locust tree leaves in his bag. The one who had the toughest life was probably Chen Pinggan. However, in the blink of an eye, nearly 15 years had passed for the children and youngsters in the streets and alleys of the Pearl Grotto Heaven. Everyone had their own encounters, opportunities, and achievements, but it was not a smooth journey. Unknowingly, 15 years had passed. Many children in the town were already in their 20s. The group of young people back then was already in their 30s. End of chapter. 652. A tall, large young man and a beautiful woman entered the territory of the Dragon Province of the Dali dynasty together. It was a treasured land of feng shui after Liju's dwelling shattered and took root in the earth in the past. There were many stories about the landscape here, and it was one of the best cultivation grounds of the Aquarius continent. However, all of the landscape and people seemed to be tainted by the mist of the mountains' feng shui, obscuring everything. When the two of them made their way towards Huaihuang City along the Tiefu River, they passed by an ancestral temple of the water goddess that flourished with incense. Due to their identities and cultivation foundations, neither of them were bold enough to enter and offer incense. When they finally saw the eastern gate of the city after so much difficulty, the young man felt like he had been relieved of a great burden. He sighed emotionally, "We're finally here. Miss Ma, should we pay Mr. Chen a visit first, or should we visit Jiyu Kan's home in the provincial city? Luopa Mountain might be a little harder to find, but the provincial city is relatively easier to find." The couple's journey north through the Dragon Province this time had not been easy. It was mainly because Jiyu Kan had suddenly told them to head north by themselves. He and the strange scholar called Liu Kaicheng wanted to visit the Shu clan in Clearwind City, which made the timid Seng Yi extremely uneasy. In his early years, the caretaker of Green Gorge Island, Zhong Yi, had dragged him out of the fiery pit on Reedy Moon Island and brought him to the thatched hut at the entrance of the mountain. After meeting the accountant, Seng Yi's life underwent an overwhelming change. Afterwards, he met Jiyu Kan. From fear to intimacy, and now to dependence, it had all happened in just a few years. To cultivators who liked to meditate, it was like the snap of a finger. Before he knew it, Seng Yi, who would have nightmares from a casual glance from Jiyu Kan, instead felt uneasy without Jiyu Kan by his side. He went on a sightseeing tour, feeling unsteady every step he took. In reality, Seng Yi, who was naturally suited to the path of ghost cultivation, had broken through quite quickly in the past few years. As a matter of fact, it could even be described as extremely fast. It was only because he had Jiyu Kan by his side that he did not stand out. Seng Yi was now a true sea-viewing realm chi practitioner. In the Jianghu and mountains of regular vassal states, he could be regarded as an immortal of the middle five realms. Due to the fact that Seng Yi had cultivated unorthodox techniques, her yin qi was rather heavy. Therefore, when Seng Yi traveled to the north with Jiyu Kan, she was still able to get close to the mountains, rivers, temples, and immortal mountains. However, when she parted ways with Jiyu Kan, she did not have the guts to do so. In addition, Ma Duyi, who was by her side, was even more ghostly. She was only able to walk in the human world by relying on the fox skin talisman. In the eyes of the immortal masters on the mountain who had profound Taoism, whether it was Seng Yi or Ma Duyi, they were easily regarded as disgraceful and filthy existences. Ma Duyi had a jade pendant hanging from her waist. It was the peace and peace jade pendant that Jiyu Kan had given them as a protective amulet. She thought for a moment and smiled. "Let's go to Luopa Mountain first. We are so familiar with Mr. Chen, so we shouldn't be rejected. Even if Mr. Chen isn't there, it shouldn't be difficult to ask someone for a cup of tea, right?" Seng Yi grinned and said, "Okay, I think so too." There were always some people who would feel more at ease when they thought of this. After passing Huaihuang County, they asked the local people for directions. However, they couldn't understand each other. They finally found a shopkeeper who could speak Dalis official language. However, the shopkeeper didn't know the specific address of Luopa Mountain. He only gave a general idea. After passing the small town, they first found Zhenju Mountain, which was just a small hill. Then they would find an opportunity to ask the immortals in the mountain for directions. After entering the continuous mountains full of spiritual qi, the two of them searched for a long time before they found Mount Huameng, which was the territory of Luopa Mountain. After going south, they reached the foot of Luopa Mountain's cliff, which was not too far from the southern gate. However, Seng Yi and Ma Duyi saw an incredible scene. First, they saw a little girl in black with her back to them. She was looking up at the sea of clouds hanging on the cliff like a snow-white belt. The little girl carried a small golden pole on one shoulder and a green bamboo walking stick on the other shoulder. She shouted loudly, Pei Qian, don't jump wrong this time. It's so troublesome to fill the hole. Seng Yi glanced around the little girl. The ground was full of potholes. The green bamboo walking stick on the little girl's shoulder was very familiar. The little girl in black suddenly turned her head and looked at the two foreigners who had stopped in their tracks. She slipped away as fast as lightning. Seng Yi suddenly looked up. A black dot broke through the sea of clouds. With a whistling sound, it suddenly fell. In an instant, a short thin figure fell heavily on the ground. There was a loud noise. The earth trembled and dust flew. Seng Yi concentrated and stared into the distance. He saw that in the big hole, there was a girl with dark skin and a thin figure. She bent her knees slightly and slowly got up. She turned her head and looked at the little girl in black who was holding her head and squatting at the edge of the big hole. She complained, "Little Mealy, what's going on? If I didn't have sharp eyes and changed my landing route, you would have fallen into the hole. What if you got hurt? Didn't I tell you not to move?" As she spoke, the girl with a shocking demeanor walked casually to the little girl's side. Then, intentionally or unintentionally, she stood between Ju Mealy and the two foreigners. Ma Duyi noticed that the girl was wearing a pair of sloppily woven straw sandals. Fresh blood was flowing out. Ma Duyi couldn't help but glance at the cliff and then at the girl. Was she jumping off the cliff to commit suicide or was she playing around? Seng Yi and Ma Duyi were not pure martial artists. They didn't know the many subtleties of the girl jumping off the cliff. Ask fist. The girl was using the ask fist with her body and the earth. She had to restrain all her godlike fist intent. She had to rely on her physical body to deliver the heaviest punch as if she was falling from heaven to the mortal world. In the girl's words, she was going to give the little girl on the ground a hard blow to the head. This was a method that the girl came up with herself. Nuanshu obviously didn't agree. He felt that it was too dangerous. Pei Qian was still at the bottleneck of the fifth realm. His physical body wasn't strong enough. Little Mealy felt that it was feasible. Just as Chen Nuanshu was about to ask the old chef, Pei Qian stepped on the 6 green bricks on the ground outside the bamboo building, opened up a path with the 6-step walking stake, and leaped into the air, disappearing from sight. Ju Mealy was lying on the cliff with her butt sticking out. Chen Nuanshu was very anxious. Old chef had appeared at the edge of the cliff unknowingly. He glanced at the ground and clicked his tongue. Chen Nuanshu was relieved. It seemed that everything was fine. Later, Pei Qian quickly climbed up the cliff. Then, limping, his eyes shining, he laughed and said, "Awesome, awesome." Zhu Lian didn't say anything. He turned and left. Then, there were many big holes on the ground. Ju Mealy secretly made a fierce gesture to Pei Qian. Chen Nuanshu, who was rarely angry, scolded her. Then, there was the scene that Seng Yi and Ma Duyi saw today. If this was how Luopa Mountain treated their guests, it was a new experience. Pei Qian looked at the two strangers who came from afar and asked, "Is the sound of the abacus on the left or the right?" Seng Yi was confused. Ma Duyi answered, facing the mountain gate. "It's the accountant's room on the left." Pei Qian smiled and cupped his fists. "Greetings, fellow Daoistseng and sister Ma, Pei Qian, the first disciple of Luopa Mountain." Ma Duyi sighed in his heart. What a clever girl. She had good taste. Ji Yukan had said in private that Liu Kaicheng had cast a camouflage spell on them that could help hide the aura of the otherworldly item. However, Ji Yukan also said that there was no need to reveal this to Seng Yi. When traveling outside, Seng Yi should be careful. Ma Duyi laughed and scolded at that time. She was worried that he would cause trouble by wandering around, right? Ji Yukan smiled and didn't say anything. She just handed over the priceless piece and safety token. Ma Duyi didn't argue with Ji Yukan. In the end, it was Ji Yukan who thought more and was more experienced. Sometimes, when he got along with Seng Yi and Ma Duyi, even without Ji Yukan, he would sigh with emotion. Ji Yukan learned things too fast. No matter what she learned, cultivation was needless to say. She spoke official dialects everywhere, traveled with the heroes of Jianghu, chatted happily with the officials who went for a spring walk, and chatted with the woodmen in the countryside and the common people in the marketplace. It seemed that Gu Kan could always do as the Romans do, pulling Ma Duyi and Sengyi apart. At this moment, Zhu Mili was standing beside Pei Qian, tilting her head and frowning. Then, she pretended to understand and nodded gently, pretending that she was used to the Jianghu and understood everything. Since they were entertaining guests, it was not good to take the cliff home. Pei Qian took the two guests to take a detour to the mountain gate. Of course, he didn't forget to introduce little Mili, the right guardian of Luorpa Mountain. Zhu Mili reminded in a low voice, "It's the right guardian of Luorpa Mountain. She used to be the right guardian of Dragon Riding Alley, but now she's..." Pei Qian coughed. Zhu Mili immediately shut up, tiptoed, and stretched out her hand to cover her mouth. "Don't record it, don't record it. I haven't let it slip yet." Pei Qian rubbed her little head and didn't say anything. What record? In fact, little Mili and Nuan Shu only had merit books. There was no account book at all. It was just that this kind of thing couldn't be said. Otherwise, little Mili would be arrogant. After Ma Duyi heard this, his expression was normal. In fact, he was stunned for a long time. Sengyi, on the other hand, was fine. Mr. Chen had always been calm when looking at things in the world as long as there was no reason. When they arrived at the mountain gate, Zheng Dafeng was no longer there. Now, young Yuan Lai was temporarily staying there and was in charge of guarding the gate. Center Yuanji just happened to practice martial arts from the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain. She was now a fourth realm martial artist, but breaking through the third realm bottleneck was a bit difficult. It was not good either. Old Chef said it was very good, but Center Yuanji was not very satisfied. No matter how good her relationship with Yuan Bao was, both of them were pure martial artists. There would definitely be competition. Women were often like this. No matter how good their relationship was, there would be a little competition between their cute eyes and sweet smiles. This was human nature. Compared to the competition between men, it was more graceful and moving. Moreover, Yuan Bao and Yuan Lai's master was Lu Baixiang, and Center Yuanji had always regarded old Mr. Zhu as her teacher. Old Mr. Zhu and Lu Baixiang seemed to be of the same generation in Luorpa Mountain. The two seniors didn't compete for anything, but as their disciples, she and Yuan Bao still had to compete. The green-robed youth, Yuan Lai, took advantage of his sister's absence to sit by the wall and read. When Center Yuanji reached the foot of the mountain, he was no longer in the mood to read and looked at Miss Center. Before Uncle Zheng left, he left a lot of books for Yuan Lai in the study room of the house. He also told the young man that when he was older, he could go to Old Chef's private library. The books there contained a lot of knowledge. The youth was somewhat fascinated. Seeing Pei Qian and the others, the youth could only pull his mind out of Miss Center's beautiful eyes and hurriedly walked to the mountain gate's memorial arch. After listening to Pei Qian's introduction, he bowed to the two guests who were old friends of the young mountain lord. The youth suddenly realized that this was the etiquette of a scholar. If his sister knew, he would be scolded again. Yuan Lai hurriedly cupped his fists and smiled. After Center Yuanji greeted them, she continued to practice her martial arts and climb the mountain alone. Old Mr. Zhu had once told her that if she walked on the right path, she could make up for it with hard work. She could not practice until she was dead. If she wanted the fist intent to enter her body, she had to find a source of fresh water in the fist technique. This was the so-called martial artist who practiced martial arts to reach a high level. In the end, old Mr. Zhu asked Center Yuanji to think carefully about what she wanted from practicing martial arts. If she understood, practicing martial arts would not be a difficult task. When they reached the mountain, Pei Qian realized that old Chef was not at home. Fortunately, Chen Nuanshu was there, so she did not have to worry about neglecting the two guests. As long as they were guests of Luopo Mountain, there was no difference in status. Zhu Lian went to the sword prayer platform. Sword cultivator Kui Wei, youth Zhong Jiazhen, and Jiang Chu were all staying here. Wei Pai stood at the foot of the mountain and slowly climbed with Zhu Lian, who he had called over at the last minute. Wei Pai smiled. Fortunately, The person in charge of the Dragon Spring Sword sect is not Master Wan, but Miss Xiaoxiao. Otherwise, even I might not be able to cover everything. Zhu Lian's expression was not relaxed. That woman's identity has been confirmed. Wei Pai nodded. She is the ferry woman that Chen Pinggan asked us to find. She is called Chun Shui. Back then, after the cross-continent ferry crashed into the territory of the Zhuang dynasty, she was lucky enough to survive. She changed her name to Shiqiu and exposed the collusion between the Heavenly Lord Xieshe and the Song clan of the Great Li through the catoptric deflection on a small immortal mountain. She framed the Zhuang dynasty. Regarding this matter, Emperor Dallas' imperial study had a special discussion. If not for the imperial tutor Kui Dong who felt that this matter was a leak, it did not matter if the matter was exposed. Or rather, Kui Dong was hoping to use this matter to lure the big fish to take the bait. Otherwise, even if the ferry maid was secretly taken away, with the interwoven web of Dallas spies, a female cultivator of the lower 5 realms would not be able to escape death even if she was rescued by an expert. Zhu Lian asked, "This matter is very troublesome." Wei Pai smiled. "Of course. Why would I ask you to come if it was not troublesome? This kind of matter may seem big or small, but it is ultimately a taboo." Zhu Lian said, "It is not troublesome. I just need to confirm one thing." Wei Pai nodded. "As long as you know. Anyway, my reputation is terrible. I am not afraid of this matter." Zhu Lian shook his head. "It is not that simple. All right, I know the way. I will walk on my own. You go back to the cloud padding mountain and pretend that you know nothing." Wei Bo furrowed his brows. Zhu Lian said, "Don't ruin the relationship if you want it to last. Brother Wei, we are friends and business is business. Since we are friends, there are some things that I should not involve you in." Wei Pai smiled. "Then I will keep an eye on the surroundings of the sword prayer platform. If there is any movement, we will discuss and come up with a plan." Zhu Lian nodded. A friend was honest and kind, so he should return the favor. This was the righteousness of the Jianghu. Wei Pai, who had previously detained the group of people from the border of the northern peak to the sword prayer platform, disappeared. Zhu Lian saw the travel-worn group of people. Kui Wei, who was at the golden core bottleneck of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, was confused. He could only watch over the group of people who had mysteriously appeared on the mountain top. There was a young master surnamed Dugu, a maidservant named Meng Long, and a girl named Shiqiu. After Zhu Lian arrived, he nodded to Kui Wei, who left on his sword. Zhu Lian looked at the girl whose real name was Choshunya and asked, "Miss Choshunya, I have 2 questions. Please answer them honestly." The maidservant, Meng Long, looked somewhat displeased. The pale-faced young master, however, looked calm. Choshunya nodded. Zhu Lian had a kind expression. He smiled and asked, "First, did Miss Choshunya want to find my young master? Second, when did you have this idea? Did you want to find the only person you can trust in a foreign land after the ferry crashed, or did you have no choice but to do so now that you have no other choice?" Choshunya's eyes were clear. She said, "I have never thought of finding Chen Pinggan before. The reason why I changed my mind now is because I have implicated you and caused you to be hunted down. I only hope that you can survive and that Chen Pinggan can hand me over to the Dali dynasty." Choshunya paused for a moment and smiled sincerely. "It may be childish, but it is the truth." Zhu Lian nodded and smiled. "I trust you, Miss Choshunya." Then, the hunchbacked old man turned his head with a smile. "You are a noble of the Zhuang dynasty who has been exiled all over the world, right?" Young Master Dugu nodded. "Indeed, I dare not lie to you. My real name is Dugu Duanxian, and I am now known as Xiao Poxian. I am from a fallen country. I do not want to die yet, which is why I came up with this plan. I used a favor to coerce Miss Shiqiu into bringing me to Luopa Mountain to seek protection." Zhu Lian asked, "Do you think you can survive at Luopa Mountain, or are you desperate?" Young Master Dugu said, "It's the latter." Along the way, the 3 of them had been intercepted twice. The first time was an unexpected encounter, while the second time was when the cultivators accompanying Dallas' army had come prepared. Zhu Lian smiled. "What favor do you owe Miss Choshunya?" Tell me about it. I'm only in charge of some trivial matters on Luopa Mountain. I haven't studied much, so my knowledge is limited. I really do need to consult young Master Dugu properly. Dugu Duanshuan was speechless. He obviously had impure motives for risking his life to save Shiqiu. He definitely did not do it out of pure righteousness. The maidservant, Meng Long, was miserable. How did her young master end up in such a state? After a moment of silence, Zhu Lian asked, "Where did the final battle take place?" Dugu Duanshiren said, "Around the borders of the kingdom of Southern Stream, extremely far away from the dragon province of Dali. The reason why I was intercepted was because someone among the cultivators accompanying Dali possessed the imperial jade seal of the Zhuiying Empire. They were able to follow the traces and find me. After the battle, I first pretended to head south. Along the way, I severed the dragon vein in the miniature world in my body before silently making my way north. I shouldn't have been followed by Dali." The young man's words were concise and to the point. As for the great danger involved and the price he had to pay, no one would know about it. Zhu Lian asked, "Immortal Xiao Po, are you willing to struggle at death's door here, or are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your country?" Dugu Duanshuren smiled. "Senior, you're asking too much." Zhu Lian nodded. He looked at the female cultivator of the North Continent with a tragic background and smiled. "Miss Choshunya, do you know that you'll cause a very great problem for my young master by doing this?" Choshunya was just about to say something. However, Zhu Lian had already smiled. "What are you thinking? I've said it before. I have a good memory, so I'll know once I hear it. That's why I'm only telling you the truth right now." Choshunya nodded. She bit her lip so hard that it bled. One of her hands was hidden in her sleeve. She gripped something tightly, and her arm trembled slightly. Apart from repaying Sir Dugu for saving her life, she actually had selfish motives. She hoped that she could send something to Luopo Mountain. After that, even if Luopo Mountain wanted to take credit for her and the Song clan, it would not matter. Zhu Lian chuckled and looked around. There were many wild persimmon trees on the sword prayer platform. In winter, the persimmons hung on the tall branches. They were bright red and cute. In the hometown of the lotus flower blessed land, persimmons had another name. It was very unique, Marquis of Icefrost. Zhu Lian finally said to the dazed young woman, "If my young master was here, he would be very happy to be able to reunite with Miss Choshunya after a long separation." After saying this, Zhu Lian left the sword prayer platform. The maidservant Meng Long asked softly, "Sir, what's this?" Dugu Duanshiren smiled broadly. "It's not bad to live under someone else's roof and beg for food." After Zhu Lian walked down the sword prayer platform, Wei Pai appeared. Zhu Lian laughed angrily. "Is there a great mountain lord like you who is so unlucky?" Wei Pai laughed. "I have nothing better to do." Zhu Lian put his hands behind his back and said slowly, "That Miss Shiqiu must be saved. As for the other two, we just need to understand one thing." Wei Pai said, "That is, whoever tells him to come to this unknown Luopo mountain will be able to live." Zhu Lian said with a shocked expression, "Brother Wei is wise." Wei Pai gave a polite smile. Zhu Lian scratched his head and laughed. "That's good too. I can find something to do. I can't always be a chef wearing an apron and be despised by people every day. It's time for our Luopo mountain to take the initiative to solve our problems. Otherwise, unnecessary trouble will only increase." Zhu Lian sneered. "Pick on a soft persimmon?" Wei Pai smiled knowingly. It seemed that he was still angry about the matter of the jade liquid river water goddess. Wei Pai looked in the direction of Luopo mountain and said, "What a coincidence, we have guests." The two disappeared into thin air and appeared on Luopo mountain. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi saw the handsome immortal. As for the kind-looking old man beside him, he was far from being comparable to the handsome man with the golden earrings. They could not take their eyes off him. Chen Wanshu hurriedly stood up and introduced Zhu Lian, Wei Pai, Luopo Mountain's manager, old Mr. Zhu, and the Northern Mountain Lord, old Mr. Wei. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi were scared half to death. Among the 5 mountain lords of the continent, Wei Pai's realm was the highest and he was the most famous. Pei Qian reminded, "Old chef, it's time to eat. Bring out all your best skills." Xiaomi wiped her mouth. "Of course." Zhu Lian called out softly and immediately went to the kitchen in the backyard to get busy. It was as if the small kitchen was Zhu Lian's little world. Wei Pai felt helpless in his heart. He could rely on his face to make a living than Jiang Shangzhen. Why did he have to be a chef? At the Dragon Riding Alley's New Year shop, old friends were also reunited. Dong Shuijing, Lin Shuyi. There was also the little girl who was worried that the nickname Little Stone would spread. After following her family to Dallas capital, she was now a married woman. Shi Jiachuan, Li Baoping's best friend. The Dragon Riding Alley's New Year shop and the grass shop next door were both Shi Jiachuan's ancestral businesses. Shi Chuanjia and Shi Lingshan, who came from Peachleaf Alley, were also relatives. However, Shi Chuanjia's seniority was higher. If the two really met, they would have to call her aunt. The world was unpredictable. Schoolmates and good friends separated in the small town. More than 10 years later, they had completely different identities. Shi Jiachuan was now happy to take care of her husband and children. Her husband was a son of an aristocratic family. His surname was Bian and his name was Wenmao. His family had no relationship with the painting master who could place his painting in the imperial study. Bian Wenmao's family had lived in Dallas capital for hundreds of years. Their ancestors were the aristocratic family of the Lu dynasty. Probably because the family's influence lasted for a long time, the family that took root in Dali was not prominent in the officialdom. However, most of their identities were very noble. Many of the family's advisors were scholars who had a small reputation in the literary circle in Dali. There were also the honorary members of the family of the immortal on the mountain. They were even more extraordinary. One of them was an elder of the Eternal Spring Palace's ancestral hall. The other was unlucky. In his early years, he and a few good friends who had lived in the mountains for a long time passed by the sky above Liju Grotto heaven. For some reason, they had a conflict with Saint Wan Jiao. Their ending was not good. However, they managed to keep their lives. They were luckier than the other friend who died directly. This time, they met because Dong Shuijing went to Dallas capital to do business and looked for Shi Jiachuan. Shi Jiachuan wanted to arrange a time for her schoolmates and good friends to gather in her hometown, Huaihuang town. However, this time, Li Baoping went to the south to travel and missed it. Therefore, Shi Jiachuan was now complaining about Baoping. The group sat in the backyard of the shop and reminisced. The shopkeeper, Shi Ru, moved the table and stools, brought tea and pastries, and quickly left. Dong Shuijing listened to Shi Jiachuan's nagging and laughed. "Baoping didn't even give you face. She shouldn't have." Lin Shuyi nodded. "I'll let Li Huai talk to her later." Shi Jiachuan rolled her eyes and said, "Li Huai? Forget it. Your guts are the size of a needle's eye. How dare you kick up a fuss in front of my Baoping?" Suddenly realizing that her husband was sitting beside her, Shi Jiachuan quickly sat up and restrained her expression. Bian Wenmao was a distinguished and elegant scholar. His elders gave him an excellent name. Now, he was compiling history books in the Hanlin Academy. He was an outstanding talent among Dallas native officials. Although he was not considered outstanding, he was able to gain a foothold in the literary world of Dallas capital at such a young age. He was also working in the Hanlin Academy, which was known as the place of Prime Minister. Once he was sent out, his official position would not be small in the future. It was only in Huaihuang County, where the Cao and Yuan surnames were bound to compete. In other places, Bian Wenmao would be a first-class Yaman's guest. Bian Wenmao's impression of these two young men was very ordinary, and the other was passable. The ordinary one was Dong Shuijing, who came from a merchant family. The passable one was Lin Shuyi, who was studying at the Great Sui Kingdom's Cliff Academy. As for their family background, Shi Jiachuan had briefly mentioned it, but it was all unintentional. Dong Shuijing's family background was not too good, but he had started his career early. As for the matter of him starting a family, it was a bit uncertain. Lin Shuyi's father had worked under 3 dragon kill supervisors. It was said that he was now working in Dallas capital, but he did not have much contact with the Shi family. Bien Wenmaro also did not feel that it was worth making friends with a foreign Lin family. On the other hand, Lin Shuyi was able to study at the Cliff Academy. In the future, he would be able to enter the Dallas officialdom. Li Huai energetically walked into the rear courtyard. "Well, little Shitu, we haven't seen each other for so many years, but you're speaking ill of me as soon as we meet." Shi Jiachuan turned his head and was stunned for a long time. How did the dignified Li Huai suddenly grow into a tall young man? Lin Shuyi and Dong Shuijing, the former did not change much and had always been the same. Dong Shuijing was also fine. Only Li Huai did not seem to be the same as when he was young. For example, when Li Baoping threw his underpants on a tree, Li Huai rolled on the ground and cried, just to attract Mr. Qi. Shi Jiachuan stood up and joked, "Li Huai, you must have eaten a lot these past few years." Bien Wenmaro slowly stood up and smiled without saying anything. Li Huai was one of his wife's classmates who talked a lot with his wife. He spoke without restraint and said a lot of embarrassing things. Therefore, he was also the one that Bien Wenmaro was least interested in. At first glance, Bien Wenmaro could tell that he was a blockhead who did not know how to read. He only got into the Cliff Academy because of his ancestors' good deeds. This kind of person would not be able to stand up even if you gave him a few excuses. Sooner or later, he would retreat to the bottom of the stairs. Anyway, Dong Shuijing was good at something. There were some rumors that he had clung on to Supervisor Cao and County Chief Yuan at the same time. If this was true, his business should not be too small. Li Huai first greeted Shi Jiachuan, who obviously did not like him very much and was polite and distant. However, he could not embarrass his good friend Shi Jiachuan, so he had to smile. Then, he sat down opposite Shi Jiachuan. Li Huai grabbed a piece of cake and said vaguely, "Before Baoping left, she said that she would go to the capital to find you before returning to the academy." Shi Jiachuan smiled and said, "At least she has some conscience." Lin Shuyi and Dong Shuijing sat opposite each other. In fact, they had a good relationship. However, Shi Jiachuan thought it was funny. The reason was simple. They both liked Li Huai's sister. Shi Jiachuan did not think that Lin Shuyi had a good family background. He was also a scholar, so Li Liu would definitely like Lin Shuyi. Shi Jiachuan always felt that Li Liu, who often went to the private school to pick up her younger brother from school, was strange. However, he could not tell what was strange. Logically speaking, Li Liu was older and was already a young girl. She was gentle and weak in front of everyone. Compared to Ji Qiu, who was by Song Jisin's side in the mud bottle alley, they had completely different temperaments. They were both beauties. However, Shi Jiachuan felt that if he really got along with Li Liu, the maidservant Ji Qiu, who did not smile in front of anyone, might not be as difficult to deal with as Li Liu. Bien Wenmaro still had a social gathering with friends in the provincial capital. However, it was rare for his wife to leave the capital and return home. Moreover, they were all her childhood friends. This Tanhua scholar restrained himself and did not show the slightest bit of emotion. Shi Jiachuan was very considerate. After about an hour at the shop, he got up and left for the provincial capital. His husband's friend's carriage was waiting for him at the Dragon Rider alley. Li Huai and the others saw him off at the door of the shop. Coincidentally, Yu Lu and Xie Xie had also come down the mountain from Linlu Academy. They came to the Dragon Rider alley, planning to go to Luopa Mountain with everyone. Earlier, Li Huai had gone there alone. When he returned to the Cloud Peak Academy, he repeatedly talked about how he had lost. Bien Wenmao did not take it to heart. He politely said goodbye to everyone and helped his wife into the carriage. Finally, he bowed and said goodbye. After watching the carriage leave, everyone went to the backyard of the shop to chat. Li Huai held the back of his head with both hands. "This Bien Wenmao is so arrogant." Lin Shuyi said indifferently, "Shi Jiachuan is looking for a husband. As long as Bien Wenmao really likes her, it's fine. Shi Jiachuan is not looking for a good friend for us." Dong Shuijing nodded. Li Huai pursed his lips. "I just think that Shi Jiachuan can find someone better." Lin Shuyi shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." Li Huai suddenly became worried. Is it really okay for Baoping to wander the Jianghu alone? She is not a cultivator. Lin Shuyi thought about it, but still did not reveal the secret. Yu Lu and Xie Xie had similar thoughts. The only one who was kept in the dark was probably Li Huai, who was unlucky and could only see if there was dogshit on the ground. Before Lin Shuyi went to Luopa Mountain, he asked Li Huai and the others to wait for a while. He went to the ancestral house to clean the courtyard and the ancestral hall. The young scholar was alone, silently reciting his family's teachings. Finally, he lit 3 incense sticks and murmured, "Thank you to the ancestors." Li Huai was impatient. He said that he would go to Zhenzhou Mountain first and wait. When he arrived at the small hill not far from his ancestral house, Pei Qian and Zhu Mili were already waiting there. Pei Qian said, "The general of a defeated army." Li Huai quickly said, "It's an honorable defeat. I don't dare to say that I'm brave." Pei Qian nodded and said. Pei Qian asked, "Where are the 2 minions of our branch?" Li Huai said guiltily, "They wrote the wrong articles and were scolded badly by the headmaster. Now they are chewing their pens." Pei Qian shook his head and then pointed to Zhu Mili beside him. "Zhu Mili will be the deputy chief of our branch from now on." Zhu Mili was stunned on the spot. Good news. Now she had a lot of official titles. Li Huai was overjoyed. The branch, which originally had a total of 3 people, finally had a strong army. Then everyone went to Luopa Mountain in a mighty manner. When they reached the mountain, Yu Lu stopped at the mountain gate and said that he would go up the mountain later to chat with Yuan Lai, who was guarding the door and flipping through books. Xie Xie also wandered alone. At the mountain god temple at the top of the mountain, he met Center Yuanji, who was practicing martial arts, and the girl Yuan Bao, who was practicing martial arts. Xie Xie looked a little absent-minded. It was as if he saw himself in the early years of his carefree cultivation on the mountain. After that, Pei Qian brought Xiaomi to Lotus Root Blessed Land after old chef and Wei Ba nodded their heads. They followed the path they had taken before, trekking through mountains and rivers until they reached the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom. They passed by Zhuangyuan Alley and went to the temple to burn incense. Then they sat in the corridor in a daze. Zhu Mili just accompanied Pei Qian. When Pei Qian was happy, Zhu Mili would talk more. When Pei Qian was not happy, she would be silent. In the end, Pei Qian chose a private house which she secretly bought with money. Old chef also knew about it and turned a blind eye to it. That was the quiet house where the great demon Ding Ying, Ya, and Zhu Shi of the Spring Tide Palace stayed. Pei Qian sat there cross-legged and rolled up her sleeves like her master. She closed her eyes to rest and nourish her fist intent. The reason why she came here was to break through the bottleneck of martial arts. Pei Qian wanted to take back as much of the martial arts fate of Lotus Root Blessed Land with her own ability. And when the time came, Wei Pai would open the gate of the Blessed Land. Pei Qian would also follow her master and scatter all the martial arts fate she won from the vast world to nourish Lotus Root Blessed Land. Grandpa Kui had left and there was no way to go home. Then she would take the martial arts fate left behind by Grandpa Kui back to Luopa Mountain. In the central area of the Aquarius continent, they had already started to dig an unprecedented path into the sea. It involved dozens of rivers and dozens of mountains with mountain shrines and local temples. Such a big project made even the elders of the fallen country sigh. That Dali barbarian really dared to think about things that no one else dared to think about. The Dali imperial court was so wasteful and the young emperor was so greedy. Wasn't he afraid that he would die suddenly? When the time came, wouldn't it be the people who would suffer? Just hearing that Lakeview Academy, the new Zhongyu that had a good reputation, and the Yunlin clan with a long history would all participate made people have mixed feelings. Could it be that the entire Aquarius continent would be surnamed Song in the future? Becoming a place with only one surname? The Great Li Imperial Court selected 3 people from the local area to be in charge of the excavation of the Great Desecration Tunnel. They were Guan Yiran, the direct descendant of the Guan family of the Upper Pillar State, Liu Xuanmei, the general of the capital, and Liu Qingfeng, the civil official of the Qingluan state. Except for the last one whom he had never heard of, the 2 young people, Guan Yiran and Liu Xuanmei, were no strangers to the officialdom of Dallas capital city. Firstly, both of them came from high families. Secondly, they were both outstanding figures among the younger generation. Especially Guan Yiran, who joined the border early and grew up in a pile of corpses as an army cultivator. Liu Xuanmei was not bad either. She had fought her way to the south to become an official. The Guan clan had been in charge of Dallas Ministry of Personnel for many years. They were known as stable as a mountain, as well as smooth as water. Generally speaking, assistant ministers, especially the left assistant minister, were transferred to other places to serve as officials of the border. Even if their ranks were the same, it was still considered demotion. Therefore, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel was a joke in Dallas officialdom. It was said that there were once two officials who left the capital to become officials of the border. They were both from the same background as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. However, the Dali imperial court was extremely unfamiliar with Liu Qingfeng. In fact, even the Ministry of Personnel, where Master Guan was in charge, didn't know much about Liu Qingfeng. The vassal Qing Luan's reopening of the water transport, the Ministry of Personnel's evaluation was only good. He didn't make any contributions, but he worked hard to be in charge of a region. He was transferred to a border county to serve as a governor. He never thought that he would immediately have to go up north to deal with a large group of unreachable mountain and mountain gods. He was promoted from primary 4th rank to secondary 3rd rank. The Dali Imperial Court granted him a temporary position of Great Blasphemy Supervisor. Guan Yiran and Liu Xuanmei's ranks didn't change, so they instead seem to have been reduced to the assistance of a small vassal state civil official. However, Liu Qingfeng was not the first to be promoted from a vassal state to a high official of Dali. Wei Li, the governor of a county in the Great Sui Kingdom's old vassal state of Huangting, skipped several ranks and was promoted to the current governor of Dallas Dragon Province. Among the mountain and mountain gods, a certain local lord in the confluence of the 3 rivers in Red Candle Town was promoted to the city god of a province's city god pavilion. These were all strange stories in officialdom. It was said that the governor of Qing Luan, Wei Liang, also showed signs of being promoted. The Ministry of Personnel in Dali had already leaked some news. The Qingluan kingdom in the southeast of the Aquarius continent had mysteriously gone from a remote place to a prosperous land of feng shui. Officials could distinguish between the clean and the turbid. The greatest distinction between the clean and the turbid in the Aquarius continent actually depended on whether or not they were born in Dali. However, these changes in the officialdom were nothing compared to the Chiduan mountain lord Wei Ba of the remnant god of the Holy Water Country. Wei Ba's promotion to the mountain god of the Pailuan mountain and his subsequent promotion to the mountain lord Bei Yu of the continent was nothing. It was not worth making a fuss over. The Dali Iron Cavalry had been fighting in the south for many years now. There were actually even more young faces who had risen to the ranks of generals. Apart from the descendants of the families of generals, there was no lack of people from poor backgrounds. It was just that the people of Dali border army died quickly and were promoted quickly. The people of Dali had been influenced by more than 100 years and had long been accustomed to it. The system of civil officials and mountains and rivers had always been strictly operated. Therefore, when someone suddenly appeared, it was relatively more eye-catching. Today was the first gathering of the 3 officials in charge of the Great Blasphemy excavation. There was no welcoming banquet, just on the banks of a large river. Liu Qingfeng, retainer Wang Yifu. Guan Yiran was confused. This descendant of the surname of Pillar Country was also baffled. According to his great-grandfather, he was supposed to be in charge of a north-south mountain ferry route. He had even arranged for his friends. In the end, he ran over here and naturally got scolded. Liu Xuanmei, 2 guards by her side, Cao Jun and Wei Xian. Wei Xian followed Cao Jun, whose ancestral home was in Mud Bottle Alley. Following Liu Xuanmei, who did not look like a descendant of a noble family, he could be considered to be doing well. Wei Xian, as a cultivator accompanying the army, relied on his real military achievements to obtain a military merit officer. Now, he had real power in his hands. Together with Cao Jun, he was Liu Xuanmei's right-hand man. It was rumored that Wei Xian had an impression of Dallas' second hunting inspector, Cao Gui. As for Cao Jun, he was extremely famous in Dallas Army. The three of them introduced themselves. In fact, Guan Yiran and Liu Xuanmei were best friends. Therefore, the only person they needed to know was Liu Qingfeng, who appeared out of nowhere. Then, not far away, a young man in white came, riding on the back of a child, holding a branch in his hand and shouting, "Go, go, go, go." Approaching the crowd, the young man laughed and said, "I have a little donkey that never says it's hungry." In Qingfeng City, a woman in red led a horse out of the city. In the night, she walked into a mountain valley 30 miles away from the suburbs. In the middle of winter, peach blossoms bloomed along the way. Li Baoping led the horse slowly, looking around. The scenery was pleasant. There were green mountains on all sides, and white clouds were constantly rising from the mountains. Not far ahead was the destination of this trip to Qingfeng City, which was a thatched cottage with a green water and a firewood door. Li Baoping looked up at the sky. A big round jade plate hung high, which was the largest mooncake. At the thought of this, Li Baoping suddenly laughed. It seemed that she had become the little girl who walked through the mountains and rivers with her martial uncle. Her mind was full of these thoughts. But at that time, she was still swinging a small bamboo box behind her and wearing small straw sandals. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket liked to circle around her martial uncle. The mountain was high and the road was long. It seemed that no matter how far it was, she was not afraid. Li Baoping lowered her head and glanced at the snow-white narrow saber at her waist and the blade-strengthening gourd. Li Baoping stood in place. The human-faced peach blossoms stood in the bright moon. 6:53. Li Baoping was leading the horse. The person she was looking for was an elder from her hometown and her grandfather's chess friend. One of them claimed to be the best chess player in Fulu Street, while the other claimed to be the best chess player in Peachleaf Alley. Every time they played chess, they were very serious, as if they were betting on the reputation of their respective streets. However, Li Baoping didn't like playing chess. It was hard to tell whether the two elders were good at chess, but they always changed their excuses and couldn't be compared to Mr. Cheese. Back then, the old man's ancestral home was at the end of Peachleaf Alley, not far from Fulu Street. Of course, for the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket at that time, the town was not far away. She went to the immortal tomb to look for crickets and weavers, to the old porcelain mountain to pick up broken pieces, to the Dragon Tail Creek to catch fish, prawns, and crabs, to look at the high-hanging mirror in front of a house, to jump on the stairs in Dragon Riding Alley. She could smell the fragrance of peach blossom cakes from afar and hear a house suddenly had a nest of swallows chirping loudly. When Li Baoping was a child, she seemed to have endless fun things to do every day. Her daily schedule was full, so the little girl had to run fast, like the wheels of a car turning non-stop. It was as if she ran too fast and left her childhood behind. When she grew up, her childhood would stay in place. Occasionally, she would look back, but the more she looked back, the farther she went, blurrier and blurrier. A thin old man with a laurel belt came out of the thatched cottage. He laughed and called out to Miss Ping, then hurriedly opened the wooden door. The old man's face was full of relief. It seemed that little Ping had grown so big in just a few blinks of an eye. She really changed 18 times between childhood and womanhood, and she was much more demure. Was this still the lively little girl who liked to jump over the wall and sprain her ankle? Did she catch a crab home or a crab caught her and moved home? But even so, the old man still liked this little girl from the bottom of his heart. Some children always had a good relationship with their elders. Little Ping from Fulu Street and Zhao Yarrow, who used to be Mr. Cheese Page Boy, were actually such children. Li Baoping led the horse to the door and bowed. After straightening her back, she smiled and said, "Grandpa Wei." The old man's surname was Wei Benyuan. He was the former head of the Wei clan, one of the 4 clans and 10 surnames of the small town. Before the Black Pearl Cave was shattered and fell, he had written letters to the outside world. At that time, the person who delivered the letters was a clear-eyed teenager with straw sandals. Although Wei Benyuan had only met him once, he had a deep impression of him. Sure enough, after the teenager grew up, less than 20 years later, he had already built up a huge family business and even became Baoping's junior uncle. When Wei Benyuan saw Li Baoping, his smile did not diminish. He said, "You don't have to tie the horse. Just let it go." Li Baoping then let go of the reins and gently patted the horse's back. The mystical horse then went to the stream to drink water. Li Baoping asked, "Where is Sister Dao Ya?" Wei Benyuan said, "Unfortunately, she went to the Fox country to gain experience a few years ago and received a small blessing. She needs to sharpen her Taoist heart. If she really becomes a Qi cultivator of the sea-viewing realm, I'll let her accompany you to travel the mountains and rivers." Li Baoping did not say anything courteous. Of course, she was not willing to travel the Jianghu with Sister Dao Yi. Being close to Sister Dao Ya did not mean that they had to be together all the time. Being a good person did not mean being a good person who nodded and said yes every time and did not reject anything. In fact, it was difficult to be a good person who could take good care of oneself and others. Moreover, since young, Li Baoping did not like to be restrained. Otherwise, when she went to school to study, she would not be the last one to go to school and the first one to leave. However, this did not hinder Li Baoping's respect for Mr. Qi. The two of them walked into the yard together. There were stone tables and stone stools that could withstand the rain and sun. Of course, they were made of immortal materials. The old man opened the Fengsuan object and began to make tea. There were a lot of porcelain in the tea set, and the color was bright. Even those who didn't know the industry would be happy to see it. These were the substandard products that the Wei family had intercepted in the small town through their relationship with the kill supervisor. The so-called flaw was actually just a sentence from a real supervisor. It wasn't easy to pick out a small mistake. The supervisor just had to nod casually and turn a blind eye to it, and they would be able to get a favor from the old masters of the big families for free. Why wouldn't they do it? Wei Benyuan was the same as Li Baoping's Yuanian grandfather. They were very rare cultivators in the small town in the early years. However, Li Baoping's grandfather was more of a talisman and had high attainments. But for some reason, he declined the invitation of the late emperor of the Song family and did not become a minister of worship in the Dali imperial court. Wei Benyuan, on the other hand, was good at alchemy and left his hometown early. Other than the Wei family's ancestral house that was left idle in the small town, the Wei family's descendants also went to other places to spread their family. The Wei family's feng shui was good and their descendants' character and aptitude were not bad. They had the potential to study and cultivate. Wei Benyuan himself chose a place with feng shui on the outskirts of the Qingfeng city. The peach trees and streams were specially chosen and suitable for making alchemy furnaces. Wei Benyuan hoped to break through the bottleneck of the Jindan stage. This paradise was exchanged between Wei Benyuan and the Shu family of the Qingfeng city. Back then, the late emperor of Dali treated the big families in the small town generously and could buy the immortal mountain in the west at a very low price. Wei Benyuan complained that cultivating there was too noisy and not peaceful. It would inevitably make people feel uncomfortable. Therefore, he exchanged it with the Shu family for this 1,000-year-old ancestral land. However, Wei Benyuan did not agree to become a minister of worship of the Shu family. The Shu family's wife pestered him several times and the family head, Shu Hun, personally went there, but Wei Benyuan did not agree to become a minister of worship of the Shu family. Wei Benyuan was a little worried. Li Baoping's horse and the snow-white saber in the scabbard at her waist were too eye-catching. The old man could not help but ask, traveling alone this time, "Are there any accidents?" Without waiting for her to answer, the old man said angrily, "Old Li really dares to be so careless. Bad chess skills, half a bucket of ink in his stomach. Not only that, but now his brain is also muddled." Li Baoping smiled and said, "Grandpa Wei, I'm not young anymore." Wei Benyuan said, "I don't care what old Li does. If someone bullies you, tell Grandpa Wei. Grandpa Wei's realm is not high, but there are a lot of messy relationships. It's a waste not to use them. Many of them can't be handled by my descendants. I can't bring them into the coffin." Li Baoping shook her head and said, "Grandpa Wei, there's really no need. I didn't make any enemies on this trip." Wei Benyuan joked, "Are all the lechers blind? Can't you all see that our little Ping is so beautiful? Li Baoping said helplessly, Grandpa Wei, please show some of the demeanor of an elder. Wei Benyuan smiled and said, that grandson of mine, you really don't like her? Li Baoping shook her head. Wei Benyuan suddenly laughed and said, my little Ping won't like that guy. In fact, although the old man was never the kind of strict elder with a straight face and put on airs, he wouldn't laugh like this either. The old man was stunned for a moment as he heard Li Baoping's voice. The old man nodded and replied with his mind, indicating that there was no trouble here and there were no spies of the Shu family in Qingfeng City. The peach garden itself was a protective array. Even a normal nascent soul cultivator might not be able to enter quietly. Even if Shu Han was not a normal nascent soul cultivator, the head of the Shu family had a strong physique and was proficient in attacking spells. He also had the mace armor and was known for his fighting skills. Therefore, there was no need to worry about someone using the mountain view abhina in the cottage. Li Baoping then took out 2 green talisman and handed it to the old man. She explained, my brother sent this from the North Continent. The letter didn't say much except for the names of the 2 talisman. One is the core formation talisman and the other is the mud pill talisman. My grandfather should have sent it personally, but since I was going to travel, he asked me to bring it with me. Wei Benyuan took the talisman. After hearing the name of the talisman, he put it on the table and shook his head. He said, little Ping, although you're a cultivator, you might not know that these 2 talismans are priceless. I can't accept them. If I accept them, I'll never be able to repay them in this life. It's a good thing to have a high level of cultivation, but it makes me feel awkward. After weighing the pros and cons, I decided to give up my cultivation and keep my heart. Wei Benyuan smiled and said, I'm the one who's being awkward. I appreciate your brother's kindness. You're indeed the sage she who I've been teaching since I was young. I'm not being polite on purpose. Little Ping, don't you know what kind of person Grandpa Wei is? The 2 green Taoist talisman on the table, the core formation talisman, and the talisman gallbladder were like a small house blessed by fortune. Golden light overflowed and filled the room. The mud pill talisman was painted with a lotus talisman pattern. It looked like a high throne in a Dharma sect. Purple chi lingered around it, creating a grand atmosphere. Li Baoping seemed to have expected this result. She smiled and said, my brother said that if I don't accept these 2 talisman, I'll never come to Grandpa Wei again. I'll listen to my brother. Wei Benyuan waved his hand. The cultivation of the Great Path involved the fundamentals. It was not a child's play. It was not a child's play. Li Baoping said, I'll really listen to my brother. Wei Benyuan frowned and asked, Sage she is traveling alone in another continent. It must not be easy for him. It was not easy for him to come across such a great fortune. Why would he give it away? Wei Benyuan could not bear to scold Li Shisheng, who was traveling far away in the North Continent, and Li Baoping, who was right in front of him. They were both the best juniors. How could he bear to scold them? So the old man began to scold old man Li again. Old fool, you're really old fool. You're muddle-headed. No wonder your chess skills are so bad and your chess character is so bad. Li Baoping said, Grandpa Wei, my brother knows what he's doing. Wei Benyuan thought for a moment and said, I'll accept it first. In the future, unless Sage she tells me clearly, I'll take it as Grandpa Wei keeping it for him. Li Baoping smiled and said, that's not something I can control. Wei Benyuan reminded her, Qingfeng City is a place where good and bad people mix. If you still want to travel to the Fox Kingdom, Grandpa Wei will not be at ease. Smart people have bad intentions. Of course, you have to be careful. But those stupid and bad people in the mountains are actually the most annoying. They forget righteousness at the sight of profit and lust. They rely on gambling to make a fortune. The world is a mess. Li Baoping nodded and said, okay, I'll let Grandpa Wei escort me. Otherwise, I'm afraid that if I go to the Fox Kingdom to look for Sister Dao Ya, I'll get into trouble because of myself. Wei Benyuan smiled bitterly and said, now that you mention it, Grandpa Wei seems to be playing tricks. Although Dao Ya was a servant of the Wei clan, Wei Benyuan had always regarded her as a junior of his family. Li Baoping was not his biological granddaughter, but she was better than his biological granddaughter. Li Baoping smiled and did not say anything. Her grandfather once said something very strange. The reason why Brother Wei was unable to break through the bottleneck of the Jindan was not that his aptitude was not enough, but that his heart was too soft and kind. It might not be appropriate for a cultivator to be too aggressive and strive to be the first in the great Tao. But it was even more inappropriate to not have any of that. Wei Benyuan asked, "Play chess with me?" Playing chess, fishing, and Mira's flower, Mira's moon, were known as the three great pleasures of the mountain. They were the best way to pass time after cultivating. Li Baoping declined tactfully, "Grandpa Wei, you know that I don't like to play chess since I was young. Watching you play chess at that time was already my greatest patience." Wei Benyuan frowned and stood up. He looked up at the peak of the mountain and sneered, "Sneaky, are you so shameful?" If Li Baoping did not come, Wei Benyuan might have a good conversation with the uninvited guest. On the peak of the mountain stood a cultivator whose figure was covered by clouds and mist. That person looked down at the cottage in the coal and smiled. "The elixir stove has just started and the immortal peaches are falling. Your alchemy skills are not good, but you are good at picking a place. The Shu family has treated you well, but you are courting death. You are not even willing to be a consecrator in name." This person. He purposely let Wei Benyuan discover his tracks so that he could appear in the open. He appeared to be calm and unhurried. Of course, he did not rely on his cultivation level to be arrogant. Instead, outside the formation of the coal, he also carefully set up a formation that surrounded the whole kernel. To crack Wei Benyuan's mountain river formation, one had to find the flaw first and then make the final decision to break the formation with brute force. But once the formation was broken, there was no point in hiding. Wei Benyuan made a gesture in his sleeves. The mountain wind and mist condensed into white clouds in an attempt to block that person's vision. He did not expect that the Qi cultivator who spoke in the elegant language of the Aquarius continent seemed to have extremely profound Tao skills. As far as the eye could see, the white clouds connected to the formation of the coal actually dispersed on their own. Wei Benyuan looked around. This guy had a good trick. The water of the stream was already suffused with a faint green glow. There was obviously a magic treasure hidden in it. The glow quickly spread to the shore and spread out like a colony of ants. The most important thing in alchemy was the mixing of water and fire. The reason why Wei Benyuan chose this place to build the cauldron for alchemy was that this stream with innate water fate was extremely important. Wei Benyuan did not hesitate and silently recited the incantation. He wanted to use the method of flipping the back of a turtle to directly smash the mountain root and water fate of the stream. Even if he could not succeed in alchemy, he wanted to interrupt the infiltration of the other party's magic treasure into the mountain river formation. That person did not care about Wei Benyuan's clumsy trick at all. How could a Jindan who was not even an array master be able to break through his own magic treasure and secret technique? He only thought for a moment and was worried that Wei Benyuan wanted to make some movements so that he could seek help from the Clearwind City. He silently recited the incantation and the faint glow that came to the shore immediately burrowed into the ground. Wei Benyuan's flip the mountain technique was actually unable to shake the stream at all. That person laughed and said, "This technique is very good. It's a pity that you have used it so badly. After I capture you, I will definitely detain your soul and interrogate you. It's an unexpected surprise. Indeed, when luck comes, it can't be stopped." That person's line of sight shifted. He looked at Li Baoping and said, "Little girl, your family background is really frighteningly rich. I didn't dare to make a move earlier and could only follow you all the way. At the same time, I also helped you to kill 2 groups of wild cultivators. How are you going to thank me for saving your life? If you are willing to repay me with your body and be my personal maid in the future, I don't mind if I get both the money and the person. A blade strengthening gourd, the auspicious symbol knife, and 2 unexpected talisman. I want them all and I will spare your life." Li Baoping patted the small wine gourd on her waist and said, "Come and get it. Stop talking nonsense." That person sneered and said, A lousy Jindan who is not good at attacking only knows how to burn some elixirs and make friends everywhere. When the time comes, he can't protect a little girl like you. Wei Benyuan was shocked. First of all, he only thought that Bao Ping's knife was the magic weapon of the mountain. He did not see through the silver wine gourd's camouflage. On the other hand, the cultivator at the peak of the mountain knew very well and knew the name of the knife. He followed Li Baoping and obviously showed up because he was very confident. The opponent should be at least at the bottleneck of Jindan. If he was the old Yuanying immortal who had been dormant for countless years, it would be very troublesome. Wei Benyuan regretted it. If he had agreed to become a consecrator of the Shu family in Windy City, he could have called Shu Hun to help him with the communication method that could connect to the city's array. Perhaps the opponent would not dare to be so bold. He did not expect that the array that blocked the outside world would become a prison. Wei Benyuan took a deep breath and calmed his Taoist heart. He tried to calm his voice and said to Li Baoping telepathically, "Baoping, don't be afraid. Grandpa Wei will protect you and leave. Breaking the elixir furnace will cause a huge commotion. The Windy City will definitely notice. After you leave the peach garden, don't look back. Just go to the Windy City. Grandpa Wei is not good at fighting, but with the right time and place, it will not be difficult for me to protect you." That person shook his head and said, "I think it will be very difficult. It is so difficult to break through the bottleneck of Jindan, there is not much meaning in staying alive." Wei Benyuan felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. It must be the Yuanying immortal with profound cultivation. Dallas cavalry trampled the mountains and rivers of the continent. This caused many hidden cultivators to leave the mountain and enter the world. There were many people who took advantage of the situation. Li Baoping said, "Grandpa Wei, I should have sent the talisman to you." Wei Benyuan laughed angrily and said, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Baoping did not explain anything. The ripples in her heart would still listen. There were some things that should not be talked about. That cultivator's gaze was more focused on Li Baoping's narrow saber. The beauty of the mortal world, compared to the Tao of immortality, was as small as a mustard seed. It was not worth mentioning. He happened to recognize that narrow saber. It was called the auspicious symbol. It was the trump card of the divine water country of the ancient Shu kingdom. It was a well-deserved national treasure. It could suppress and gather martial arts fate. This magic treasure could already be classified as a national treasure. Although it was a magic treasure, it was actually a half-immortal weapon. The blade-strengthening gourd could only be seen to be of high quality. It was hard to say how good its appearance was. Anyway, after he got it, he might as well travel to other continents. Anyway, the current Aquarius continent did not look like a place suitable for wild cultivators. Li Baoping said softly, "Grandpa Wei, if we fight later, I can't afford to pay for this land of cultivation. It's okay, I'll ask my brother to pay you back." Wei Benyuan smiled bitterly. Was this the time to talk about this? The cultivator on the mountain peak had already found a way to completely break the formation. He was still careful and felt that all the accidents were within his calculations. When the immortal master of records went down the mountain to experience the world, he liked to pay his respects to the masters of the mountain first. Since this little girl's backer and background were people like Wei Benyuan, she was not even qualified to be an honored guest of Shu Han in Qingfeng City. A nascent soul cultivator had no choice but to be cautious. No matter how high a cultivator's realm was, he only had one life. Those nascent soul cultivators who were lying on the merit book of the ancestral hall had 2 lives no matter how low their realm was. Then he had to act decisively. This person's figure suddenly became ethereal. It was as big as a mountain peak and was actually an image of an ancient mountain lord. Not only that, the golden body image had green dragons coiled around its arms. It held a halberd in its hand, and the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers around it was extremely chaotic. This huge god that had the atmosphere of mountains and rivers fell from the mountain peak to the thatched cottage by the stream. It had the momentum of a mountain. In mid-air, the golden body image laughed and said, "Little girl, you talk big. Your brother?" If you say that you're using your own ancestor to scare people, I'll believe you a little. Why? Is your brother the Martial Mountains Markushuan or the Wind Thunder Gardens Yellow River Greatsword immortal? Wei Benyuan was about to take out a golden core and fight with the old nascent soul cultivator. Li Baoping took a step forward and used her thumb to push the narrow saber out of its sheath. In her left hand, there was another item. After this item appeared, it did not have any chi ripples, so it was not as eye-catching as the unsheathed narrow saber. But at this moment, for some reason, the golden body image floated in the air and didn't go up or down. It wasn't a little girl jumping over a wall. How could it have a cramp before it even landed? Li Baoping turned around and looked elsewhere. On the peak of another mountain, a young man in a pink robe was walking slowly in the air. He stretched out 2 fingers and twirled them gently. Every time he took a step, a white cloud would float from the sea of clouds in the distance and fall under the strange young man's feet. The giant golden body image that seemed to have been cast with the fixed body art started to turn upside down and become a puppet in the hands of the young man. Wei Benyuan was shocked. What a powerful person on the peak of the mountain. Was there such a handsome deity in the Aquarius continent? Daoist Gaozhen? Heavenly Lord Qi Zhen of the Shungwa sect? It was impossible. The Daoist deities of that sect were very strict and their Daoist hats and robes couldn't have any flaws. Besides, Sect Master Qi was so high and mighty that he wouldn't travel to Qingfeng City. The young man's colorful robe was very wide and fluttered in the wind like the clouds in the sky. In the end, the young Daoist jumped lightly and sat cross-legged on the head of the golden body image. He bent his finger and tapped it lightly, like an elder scolding a naughty junior. You like to pretend to be a big shot, right? You want to pretend to be a deity, right? Your ancestor is right here. What a joke. Wei Benyuan didn't relax at all. Instead, he was even more anxious. He was afraid that this would be a fight between tigers and wolves. If the latter had bad intentions, he wouldn't be able to protect Ping. Wei Benyuan murmured, he just isolated the heaven and earth and enveloped the golden body image. What should I do? What should I do? The nascent soul stage cultivator who was turned into a mute suffered. It wasn't that he didn't want to run, but he couldn't move at all. The other party isolated the heaven and earth so easily. His golden core stage cultivator and nascent soul stage cultivator couldn't use their unorthodox secret techniques. How could he escape? Unless he was a nascent soul stage cultivator, he couldn't break this deadlock. But if he was a nascent soul stage cultivator, he wouldn't have to hide for hundreds of years to escape from his enemies. The young Daoist in a pink robe was sitting on the head of the burly Daoist. He smiled at Wei Benyuan and said, Wei Benyuan, I once owed your Wei family a lot of favors in my early years. I won't go into the details. Old history is full of dust. Why should I go through it? Liu Kaicheng was, of course, talking nonsense. He had no choice. Ji Yukan didn't want to reveal his identity, so Liu Kaicheng had to find a lame excuse. But people on the mountain really believed it. For example, Wei Benyuan believed half of it. Li Baoping didn't believe it at all. Liu Kaicheng tilted his head and continued to imprison the golden body image. It was not difficult for a nascent soul stage cultivator to break free from the restraint of his mercy. He just didn't dare to act rashly. That was right. It was too boring to travel with Ji Yukan this time. Therefore, Liu Kaicheng felt that he lacked a follower to relieve his boredom. A nascent soul stage cultivator from the mountains was barely worthy of this honor. If it was Liu Qiqing's most disgusted immortal, he should have been dead by now. He beat the young one and the old one came? How old was he? Then he should go to White Emperor City to fight. Even if he was in the Ascendant Realm, he wouldn't dare to make a move even if Liu Kaicheng stood still. Anyway, they were going to the central continent. If they didn't leave a mess behind, Liu Kaicheng was worried that Ji Yukan wouldn't cultivate well. Ji Yukan was a good seedling. Only when she was in desperate situations again and again could she grow up quickly. She was not afraid of spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. She was the favorite seedling of the Great Way, that senior fellow apprentice in White Emperor City. Liu Kaicheng suddenly narrowed his eyes. Senior fellow apprentice seemed to like big trouble the most in his life. The little girl in front of him? What's more, senior fellow apprentice's chess skills seemed to have reached a bottleneck. This time, when he was about to take Ji Yukan back to White Emperor City, he met her, right? Liu Kai-cheng laughed heartily. He turned his head and looked in a direction. He said telepathically, "It's not up to you. The three of us can go back together." Ji Yukan stopped hiding and replied telepathically, "Liu Kai-cheng, I advise you not to do this. Otherwise, when I reach White Emperor City and succeed in my cultivation, you will be the first person I kill." She didn't show any impatience. She was the kind of person who got along well with him. She didn't blame Li Shisheng. She just blamed little uncle for not being by her side. Li Baoping wrinkled her nose secretly. Forget it. What else could she do? She would dislike little uncle tomorrow. Ji Yukan didn't do anything. It was not that she didn't want to stop him, but it was meaningless. The gap between their realms was too big. Ji Yukan was full of hatred. This unpredictable Liu Kai-cheng must die in her hands in the future. Therefore, Ji Yukan immediately telepathically said to Li Baoping, "Li Baoping, I am Ji Yukan from Mudbottle Alley. Don't be impulsive. Survive first." Li Baoping shook her head. "I don't want to die, but I won't live for nothing." Then she smiled and said, "You don't allow me to make a mistake out of kindness. Besides, it doesn't involve anything major. Ji Yukan, I have to thank you. Live well. Remember to tell little uncle that I miss him very much." Liu Kai-cheng glanced at the paper in her hand. The words on it were flowing. Liu Kai-cheng frowned, and his expression became solemn. If it had something to do with the Learning Palace, it would be troublesome. After all, the whole world was a place for scholars to study. In the peach forest, a man in a Confucian robe was trying to hold back his laughter when he saw Li Baoping shaking the peach talisman. It was rare to see little treasure bottle so childish and cute. At this moment, he took a deep breath and stepped forward to Li Baoping's side. He looked up at the golden body and the pink-robed Taoist. Li Baoping said in surprise, "Brother?" Li Shisheng nodded and turned around with a smile. "Your brother is angry. He doesn't want to talk." Li Baoping laughed and said, "My brother can be angry?" Li Shisheng smiled and nodded. Liu Qiqing's intuition told him that something bad was going to happen. It was just that the young scholar in a Confucian robe didn't seem to be in a high realm. It didn't seem to be because of the camouflage. It was impossible for him to be in the immortal realm. As for the ascendant realm, Liu Kai-cheng was not crazy. After leaving White Emperor City, he had suffered twice in the past 1,000 years. The first time, he was suppressed by the Grand Celestial Master. Of course, the Grand Celestial Master didn't need to use a Taoist seal or a sword. It was just a spell. The reason why the Grand Celestial Master of Dragon Tiger Mountain took action in person was to show White Emperor City that Liu Qiqing's senior brother should not interfere. The second time, he was inexplicably hit by a sword in that small shabby temple. It was just an ordinary wooden sword, but it easily broke Liu Qiqing's protective array. In an instant, Liu Qiqing's intuition was confirmed. The river of time stagnated. Outside of his own small world, an even larger world had appeared. Li Baoping, Wei Benyuan, the golden avatar Dharma idol, and Ji Yukan, who was at the mountain peak, couldn't even move their minds. Except for Liu Kai-cheng, who was deliberately spared. With a casual glance, the sky was high and the earth was flat for thousands of miles. Liu Kai-cheng was miserable. It seemed that he couldn't fight at all. Obviously, he was an unreasonable, stubborn person. When cultivators go out, they still have to talk about respecting the heavens and earth and having a conscience. Li Shisheng walked forward slowly and said, "Well, this is what a scholar should say." Liu Kai-cheng said with a smile, okay, let's talk reason. I'm a person who listens to the principles of scholars." Li Shisheng said, "Next, I'm going to reason with you as Little Treasure Bottle's brother." Liu Kai-cheng was about to leave this place and drive the small world to collide with the big world to escape. As for the realm and the face of the cultivators of the upper 5 realms, it didn't matter if they were on the ground or not. Between heaven and earth, the Dharma idol of a middle-aged Taoist suddenly appeared. Liu Qiqing's legs went soft, and he sat back down. He was still desperately suppressing his Taoist heart that almost collapsed on the spot. He stood up shakily, bowed, and remained silent. Li Shishing asked, "If apologies are useful, what's the use of the rules of the Great Path?" The middle-aged Taoist, who was as tall as a mountain, raised his arm and slapped down. With one slap, Liu Kai-cheng and the Dharma idol of the nascent soul cultivator were smashed into the ground. There were no spells or magical powers, nor were there any magic treasures. That Dharma characteristic Daoist merely slapped him on the head. Liu Kai-cheng lay in the big pit, and there was only one thought in his mind: can you scholars of the Aquarius continent not be like this? After Li Shishing kept his Dharma idol, he came to the big pit and looked down at the dying Taoist in the pink robe. He calculated with his fingers and sneered, "When you return to the White Emperor city, tell your senior brother that I'll find him to play chess." Liu Kai-cheng was disheartened. His senior brother had once joked with him in private that Kui Dong had a chance to make the White Emperor city no longer hang the banner first of the world, but the chance was slim. That person was not in the vast world, but in the Beko Keikyang building under the blue underworld sky. He was the eldest senior brother of the second and third chief, Lu Chen. He was the first disciple of the Daoist ancestor, and Lu Chen was taken in as a disciple by this person. One could only imagine how powerful this person's Dao was. Liu Kai-cheng struggled to get up again. He was still silent, but he sincerely and respectfully bowed to Meng Qi in a proper Taoist way. When Li Baoping came back to her senses, Li Shishing was still standing beside her, and the Taoist in the pink robe was still sitting on the head of the golden Dharma idol. Everything was the same as before. Liu Kai-cheng seemed to be smiling, but he was sweating profusely. The river of time was flowing in reverse. The key was that Wei Benyuan was still alone in a certain section of the river of time, and he was still motionless. "I've reasoned with that expert just now, and it's fine now." Li Shishing laughed softly. "Don't tell Grandpa Wei that I'm here this time, or else he'll drag me into a game of chess." Back then, our hometown only had a few chess manuals, and Grandpa Wei kept on reciting chess theories and flipping through them. It was actually very annoying. Li Baoping nodded vigorously. Li Shishing's figure dissipated, and he returned to the small vassal state in the North Continent. This kind of cross-continent travel was actually not easy since his cultivation level was still not high. Therefore, he needed to come and go as soon as possible. Li Shishing suddenly laughed and said, "You secretly grew up and didn't even say hello to Big Brother." Li Baoping grinned. Li Shishing smiled and shook his head, and disappeared in a flash. Wei Benyuan also returned to normal. Then, Liu Kai-cheng immediately stood up and left, saying that he was just joking with the little girl. As for the nascent soul cultivator under his butt, he had already put away his Dharma idol and left with Liu Kai-cheng. Liu Kai-cheng said to Jiyu Kan in his mind, "I'll wait for you in Qingfeng City. There's no hurry, you can catch up first." Jiyu Kan suppressed the doubts in her heart and landed on the thatched cottage. She went straight to the point and said, "Li Baoping, I'm sorry about today's matter. In terms of heart and mind, I'm half right and half wrong." Li Baoping was a little surprised. How could such a Jiyu Kan make martial uncle so sad back then? Or could it be that Jiyu Kan had changed a lot in just a few years? Li Baoping thought for a moment and told Grandpa Wei that she was going to take a walk by the stream with this fellow villager. Wei Benyuan was confused, but he still nodded and said, "Be careful." Li Baoping and Jiyu Kan walked by the stream. The two of them had only met when they were young and had never chatted. One liked to move, while the other liked to be quiet. When they met in their hometown, they just brushed past each other. At most, the little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket who walked in a hurry had a deep impression of the little boy's 2 streams of snot. Back then, the little slug thought that the little girl in red, who was a little older than him, did not look like a child from a rich family at all. She really did not know how to enjoy life. These two were almost the 2 most naughty children in the town. The only difference was that they were born in different families. One was born in Fulu Street, while the other was born in Mud Bottle Alley. The little girl in the red cotton-padded jacket passed through the streets and alleys, and the big white geese could not catch up with her. The little slug was a little different. In fact, he did not want to move. Under the hot sun, he lay on the ridge in the field to fish for eels, guarded the old locust tree, and hunted the oriole with a slingshot under the tree. Ji Kan's family had a few tea leaves. The little boy carried a small bamboo basket that fit him very well. The little slug picked the tea leaves with both hands. In fact, he was faster than the person who helped him. However, Ji Kan was only good at doing this, but she did not like to do it. She put the tea leaves on the bottom of the small basket he gave her and went to a shady place to slack off. After all, Liu Xianyang was his only friend. So what? The little slug in Mud Bottle Alley was still his only family in this world. The water in the stream was shallow and crystal clear. The two of them were silent for a long time. Li Baoping said, "Think about how difficult it is for youngest martial uncle." Ji Kan said, "I have." Li Baoping said with a smile, "Don't get me wrong. Youngest martial uncle didn't say much about you and Bookslip Lake. He has never liked to talk about people behind their backs." Ji Kan laughed. Of course, she would not get him wrong. What's more, so what if she said it? Ji Kan had never liked to suffer, but she was good at being scolded and beaten. Deep in Ji Kan's heart, he still did not care about other people's opinions. Even Chen Pinggan did not know that Ji Kan had been to Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley earlier than him. Liu Xianyang said that there were many rich people there. Their money bags were too full, and they often dropped money on the ground. Ji Kan had tried to pick up the money, but she didn't manage to pick it up even once. Even Ji Kan had run out of patience. She was so angry that the little slug had been sneaking around Peachleaf Alley, kicking one peach tree after another. From beginning to end, Ji Kan had taken care of all of them. During this period, whenever he encountered pedestrians, he would immediately pretend to squat under a tree and watch ants. Ji Kan now recalled that those peach blossoms, leaves, and branches that had fallen on the ground back then should have been gathered and hidden well. Li Baoping continued, "But youngest martial uncle is so familiar with you. As long as you have a little bit of promise and do something well, youngest martial uncle will not be stingy with his praise. The first time you traveled with youngest martial uncle's topic of the whole hometown almost always revolved around you and Liu Xianyang. But after youngest martial uncle came back from Bookslip Lake, he did not talk much about you." Li Baoping raised her hand and pointed at her eyes. A person is the best at telling the truth. Youngest martial uncle did not say anything, but he said everything. Ji Kan grunted in agreement. Li Baoping said, "Let's call it a day." Ji Kan did not dawdle. He said goodbye and left. Suddenly, he stopped and said with a smile, "Li Baoping, thank you." Li Baoping asked with a smile, "You only remembered to be polite now?" Ji Kan's eyes brightened. He shook his head and said, "I'm not being polite. It's because you were the first person to accompany him out of his hometown. If Li Baoping had not been at his side back then, he might not have been able to reach Ji Kan's side." Li Baoping smiled. Ji Kan also smiled. Back then, in that small temple whose walls were covered in names, Liu Xianyang stood on a ladder while Chen Pinggan held the ladder. Ji Kan threw some pieces of charcoal at Liu Xianyang and wrote down their names. The positions were extremely high. Finally, Ji Kan said, "Li Baoping, you will probably meet Chen Pinggan earlier than me. When you meet him, tell him that Ji Kan is in White Emperor City, cultivating the Great Tao." 654. Outside the Clearbreeze City, on a small hill in the wilderness, under a lone mountain peach tree, a pair of big eyes stared at each other. Liu Kaicheng stared fiercely and wiped the blood on his face. Liu Chicheng's pink Taoist robe was as beautiful as the peach blossoms. The gathering vitality wild cultivator who was detained here was actually a short young man. However, his hair was white and his face was a little old. The strange thing was that there was a long string of ancient jade pendants and small bottles hanging on his white jade belt with dragon patterns. This person was shaking, but he was still trying to maintain a standing posture. He was afraid that he would be killed by the pink-robed Taoist if he tilted his head or swayed his legs. His mood at this moment was like facing a sumptuous meal. He was about to eat, but the table was suddenly flipped. He didn't even get a chopstick and the table hit his head. Until now, he still didn't know how he fell. From the bottleneck of gathering vitality, he fell all the way to the bleak scene when he just formed golden core. What was more strange was that the other party was so powerful and seemed to be seriously injured. The problem was that he didn't do anything at all. He used to be a hero who dominated a region and was worthy of the title of the retired emperor behind several small countries. He liked to hide his identity and look for treasures everywhere. He was famous in the entire Aquarius continent for being stingy. He fought with Li Tuanjing in the Wind and Thunder Garden and survived several attacks. He was chased by an old immortal of the Divine Grandeur sect for thousands of miles and still didn't die. In the early years, he and Liu Larocheng were enemies and friends. They once explored the ruins of the Immortal's mansion in the secret land of the Jiyu Shu country. They didn't share the loot equally and were almost killed by Liu Larocheng, who was at the same level as him. Later, even though Liu Larocheng reached the sky in one step, he still killed several disciples who were traveling on Gongliu Island. Liu Larocheng couldn't find him, so he had to give up. His life could be said to be brilliant and varied, and he had experienced all sorts of strange things. However, none of them were as confusing as today. Who was the other party? How did they do it? Why did they come here? Would he die here? Liu Kaicheng shook off the blood on his hand and smiled. Thank you. Seeing that the senior was a Daoist immortal, the young cultivator from the mountains and lakes decided to cater to him. He bowed and said softly, I'm Chai Bofu, and my Daoist name is Longbo. I believe you've heard of me before. With a few steps, mountains and rivers would shrink, and huge clouds would form with a breath. He was talking about this renowned Count Xiu of the wild mountains and lakes, and he was extremely skilled in assassination and fleeing. Moreover, he was skilled in water element attacks. According to rumor, he'd had a conflict with Liu Jimao of the Slip Lake in the Grand Dao, and they'd even fought for an immortal secret manual that could reach the heavens. According to rumor, both of them attacked ruthlessly without holding back, and they'd almost fought to the point their brains sprayed into the surroundings. Liu Kaicheng gnashed his teeth and said, F***CKU. My name is Liu Kaicheng, a citizen of Baishui. Have you heard of me? Chai Bofu braced himself and said, Junior is ignorant. I have never heard of Senior's name. Liu Kaicheng fell to the ground with his back against the peach tree. He looked dejected. Picking up chicken poop in the cracks of stones and dog poop in the mud. It took me a lot of effort to accumulate this little bit of cultivation, but it's gone with a slap. You don't want to live anymore? Kill me. Chai Bofu didn't move at all. He didn't pretend to be frightened, and he wouldn't say a few words of loyalty and sincerity. When dealing with this kind of cultivator who had extremely high cultivation and was not well known, the most taboo was to act smart and draw legs on a snake. Liu Kaicheng began to close his eyes and rest. He knocked the peach tree with his head again and muttered, cut the peach tree and spoil the scenery. Then Liu Kaicheng slapped his own face fiercely, as if he had been awakened. He smiled and said, I should be happy. There's no one in the world who can survive a disaster like me. There will be good fortune in the future, great fortune. Liu Kaicheng stood up. He changed from dispirited to high-spirited in an instant. He straightened his back, shook his sleeves, and took out 3 incense sticks. Then he looked at the wild cultivator who was standing there stupidly and began to stare at him. Why don't you get away from me? You're disturbing me from burning incense and praying to immortals. Liu Kaicheng suddenly took a deep breath. No. I have to be kind to others. I have to treat people with courtesy. I have to be educated. Chai Bofu moved away step by step. He didn't dare to stand still until he was 50 or 60 feet away. He didn't feel aggrieved at all. Chi cultivators who were born in the mountains and could reach Chai Bofu's position were all shrewd. In the Wind Thunder Garden, Li Tuanjing once joked that the most profound cultivator in the world was not an immortal master but a wild cultivator. It was a pity that he had to take the unorthodox path. Otherwise, he would be able to reach the Tao. Liu Kaicheng collected his thoughts and abandoned all distracting thoughts. He began to chant. Then he rubbed the tip of the incense stick with his fingers and slowly lit it. Liu Kai-cheng seemed to bow 3 times to heaven and earth. In fact, he bowed first to the Hall of Ancestral Masters in White Emperor City who had taught him Taoism. He bowed second to the blue-robed Confucian in the ancient temple who gave him a sword. His swordsmanship was so high and his righteousness was rare. He bowed third to the middle-aged Taoist who had great power just now. Ji Yukan was cautious. When he was riding the wind, he saw Liu Kai-cheng who didn't deliberately hide his breath. He landed near the mountain peach tree. After Liu Kai-cheng bowed 3 times, he said, "What if? Why bother?" Liu Kai-cheng was silent. When the incense stick in his hand burned out, he regained his usual demeanor. He said with a smile, Okay. Don't sprinkle salt on my wound. My heart and liver are aching now." Ji Yukan didn't look at the wild cultivator at all. However, his second sentence showed his true nature. "Why should I keep him?" Liu Kai-cheng asked with a smile. "Ji Yukan, do you want to be my junior fellow apprentice or my junior nephew?" Ji Yukan said, "It's not up to me to choose." "Don't talk about him." All these years, if strangers met Ji Yukan for the first time, they would think that he was a gentle and respectful scholar, a young man with a good family education. However, Ji Yukan and Liu Kai-cheng had traveled to the north hand in hand. They had spent a lot of time together. They both knew what kind of people they were. Ji Yukan was insulting Liu Kai-cheng when he said that he didn't hold a grudge against him today. Ji Yukan said directly, "You said yourself that Mr. Qi had done you a great favor. He gave you some valuable advice and showed you the way to break through the barrier. That was how you reached the upper 5 states. You also promised Mr. Qi that when Chen Pinggan visited White Emperor City in the future, you owed Mr. Qi a favor. Therefore, you would certainly show him kindness. Now, you should consider the consequences. What you did today was ungrateful. Secondly, you made an enemy of me. Liu Kai-cheng, you are indeed a master of White Emperor City. You do as you please. I am looking forward to White Emperor City more and more. This is probably the only thing you did right today." Ji Yukan didn't talk to Liu Kai-cheng secretly in his mind. Liu Kai-cheng squinted at the wild cultivator Chai Bofu who was determined to die. He withdrew his gaze and said helplessly, "Do you want Brother Longbow to die so badly?" Ji Yukan didn't say anything. Liu Kai-cheng explained patiently, "First, yesterday's matter is yesterday's matter. Tomorrow's matter is tomorrow's matter. For example, if Chen Pinggan wanted to argue with me, I would use my senior brother. If Chen Pinggan died, I would push the boat with the current and use Mr. Qi's favor. It would be equivalent to saving Chen Pinggan's life. Wouldn't that be returning the favor? Second, let's not talk about today's result. My thoughts at that time were very simple. Compared with helping my senior brother to reach the top, making an enemy of you is your own choice. Ji Yukan, if you were me, what would you choose? Finally, I respect and fear my senior brother, but I love and miss White Emperor City. I don't want it to be just a stepping stone. I need someone to appear and give my senior brother a reason to convince himself." Except for Liu Qiqing's last sentence, Ji Yukan understood everything. Regardless of whether Liu Qiqing's reason was wrong or not, it was a reason that Liu Kai-cheng sincerely agreed with. Liu Kai-cheng was speaking from the bottom of his heart to Ji Yukan. Ji Yukan could not agree, but he had to show the reason that he did not agree with. Fists, Taoist techniques, and words were all acceptable. In the end, Liu Kai-cheng had been looking down on Ji Yukan. What he thought and what he saw was the highest point of White Emperor City. It was his senior brother and his fellow disciples who were of the same generation as Liu Kai-cheng. Liu Kai-cheng wanted to accept disciples on behalf of his master. His biggest enemy, or rather, the barrier, was actually his fellow disciples. Chai Bofu felt a chill down his spine. On the path of cultivation, he had experienced many ups and downs. It was the first time in his life that he felt so desperate. The 3 words White Emperor City were like a mountain pressing down on his heart, making Chai Bofu unable to breathe. In the 9 continents, there were millions of cultivators. In their hearts, there was only one holy land, and that was White Emperor City of the Central Divine Continent. The city lord was recognized as the #1 figure in the demonic path. Yet, this pink-robed daoist and this young man kept calling him White Emperor City, senior brother, and junior brother. Therefore, Chai Bofu waited for the two to fall silent before asking, Senior Liu, Ji Kan, how can I not die? The only person who really asked was the green-robed young man whose cultivation level was not high. Since Liu Kaicheng had detained him here, at least his life was not in danger. However, this guy Ji Kan had some old and new grudges with him. Chai Bofu had heard of the name Ji Kan before, mainly because of Liu Jimao's true monarch cutting river. It was rumored that Ji Kan, as Liu Jimao's direct disciple, had a nascent soul realm water dragon when he was still a child. He had killed a lot of people at Bookslip Lake, but for some reason, he suddenly fell silent. The water dragon disappeared, and Ji Kan disappeared without a trace. Then, the entire Bookslip Lake was taken over by foreign cultivators and became a subordinate sect of the Jade sect of the Tongya continent. Those who obeyed were probably fed to the fish by the True Realm sect. Those who understood the general situation seemed to have taken a divine bath in Bookslip Lake, washing away the filth of the wild cultivators. Chai Bofu felt that his recent luck was really terrible. How did he meet this little devil? How did Ji Kan get involved with Liu Kaicheng, who had crossed the river, and White Emperor City? Liu Kaicheng pointed at Ji Kan. Whether you live or die, you can ask my future junior brother. The higher Ji Kan's cultivation, the easier it would be for Liu Kaicheng to return to White Emperor City. Ji Kan said, if I die, I won't have to die. Liu Kaicheng couldn't help but laugh. This was quite a novel way to put it. Chai Bofu said in a deep voice, Ji Kan, why are you so aggressive? Why do you insist on killing me? Even if I have some old grudges with your master, you are a wild cultivator, and I am even more so. What is this little grudge? Liu Kaicheng said playfully, Brother Longbo, you and Liu Jimao? Chai Bofu said, to fight for a copy of the River Severing Sutra. Speaking of this, Chai Bofu suddenly realized something. Ji Kan, does Liu Jimao really think of you as the successor of the family? He also learned that sutra. Is he afraid that if I stay by your side, the great Tao will clash everywhere and ruin your fate? Chai Bofu said to himself, Liu Jimao is the most narrow-minded person. He can't wait to kill all the cultivators in the world. How could he be willing to teach you the fundamental method of the great Tao? Ji Kan naturally wouldn't reveal the inside story. Back then, Liu Jimao didn't have much confidence in breaking through in seclusion. It was very likely that he would die. Otherwise, Liu Jimao wouldn't have been willing to give Ji Kan the water technique sutra. Ji Kan wouldn't have been approached by the true owner of the sutra, Liu Kaicheng. After Liu Kaicheng was schemed against by Kui Dong, he once took in a registered disciple. That young man was old demon Mi's disciple. His name was Yuan Tiantian. Unfortunately, Liu Kaicheng spent some effort, but the results weren't good. He was too embarrassed to keep him by his side, so he threw him on a small mountain and left him to fend for himself. The young man also had the little fox demon by his side. When Liu Kaicheng parted with them, he didn't give any alms to his registered disciple. Instead, he gave the little fox demon a cultivation method and 2 protective items. However, she probably wouldn't be very diligent in her cultivation in the future. As for whether Yuan Tiantian could learn the cultivation method from her, and what kind of grudges they had in the end, Liu Kaicheng didn't care. On the path of cultivation, everything depended on luck. Liu Kaicheng didn't mind being a wild man for beautiful women, but he didn't want to be a wild father for anyone. In the early years, Liu Kaicheng helped the little fox demon not because he pitied her fate, but because he pitied himself. After Liu Kaicheng left Yuan Tiantian, he traveled alone. He didn't expect that his River Severing Sutra would fall into the hands of a wild cultivator, Liu Jimao. He was quite successful and got the title of River Severing Lord. On the path of life, there were always flowers that didn't bloom, but willows that were unintentionally planted would grow. Ji Kan glanced at Chai Bofu and suddenly smiled. Forget it. In the future, when we travel together, we can learn from each other. Since Liu Kaicheng didn't want to kill people, and Ji Yukan didn't have much confidence in killing him. It was better to keep him by his side. In fact, Liu Kaicheng didn't care about Chai Bofu's level. Even if he returned to the nascent soul realm, what could he do? Even if he worked for Liu Kaicheng, what was the point of coming to White Emperor City? Cultivating in White Emperor City was not the way of cultivation of ordinary immortal sects. They didn't pay attention to huddling together and sharing the same breath and branches. The real reason why Liu Kaicheng didn't kill this person was that he hoped that the eldest senior brother could use the karma relationship between Chai Bofu and Li Baoping to help the eldest senior brother play chess with the middle-aged Taoist priest in the future. Even if the White Emperor City only had a little more chance of winning, it would be a great thing. He believed that his little abacus had already been calculated by the middle-aged Taoist priest. It didn't matter. When the time came, the eldest senior brother would have a headache. The junior brother would do his duty, and the senior brother would play his chess. Then, the three of them didn't ride the wind. They walked together to Qingfeng City. Liu Kaicheng said casually, "Brother Longbo, your 6 natal items are all gaudy. 2 of them are only at the level of spiritual weapons. What's going on?" Chai Bofu smiled bitterly. "It's the most difficult to start cultivating in the mountains and lakes. For cultivators in the lower 5 realms, it's already a great fortune to have 1 or 2 spirit weapons successfully refined into natal items. When your level is high enough and you have enough magic weapons at hand, you can forcibly change your natal items that are deeply rooted and related to the Great Tao. It's possible, but it's too painful. I'm most afraid that the enemy will know the news. Isn't this kind of closed-door training courting death? Even if you don't die, those immortal masters of archives who have nothing better to do secretly follow the clues and interrupt your closed-door training. The loss outweighs the gain." Chai Bofu sighed and said, "If you provoke an enemy before forming the Jindan, it's not a big problem to change your natal items if your level is not high. Unfortunately, since we can form our Jindan, how can we not provoke our peers of the Jindan realm and some immortal masters of archives who cry for their parents after being beaten? Sometimes, when you look around, you really feel that you're surrounded by troubles and enemies. Immortals visited each other to seek revenge or visit relatives, but it was not like ordinary people who went on a long journey. No matter how big a continent was, it was very small when it came to opening a Taoist field. In places with good feng shui and good feng shui with slightly better spiritual energy, there were local tyrants everywhere. Famous mountains, deep lakes, and swamps were all occupied by immortals for many years. If it was not a mountain of archives, it was a mountain of mountains and rivers. The reason why it was difficult for cultivators to succeed was that they didn't have any advantages. Liu Kaicheng nodded to show that he understood. Ji Yukan smiled slightly. Chai Bofu was stunned for a moment before Liu Kaicheng pressed his head and crushed his Jindan. The latter collapsed on the ground, covered in blood and twitching. Previously, when he fell from the Yuanying realm to the Jindan realm, it was too mysterious. Chai Bofu did not suffer too much. This time, when he fell from the Jindan realm to the Dragon Gate realm, he was really suffering. Liu Kaicheng smiled and said, "Okay, now you can change your natal item in peace. Otherwise, it will be difficult for you to break through the bottleneck of the Yuanying realm. Brother Longbo, don't thank me." Liu Kaicheng rotated a finger and formed a formation to help Brother Longbo hide his breath. The spells taught in White Emperor City were very complicated. Liu Kaicheng once had a senior sister with amazing aptitude. She made a great promise to learn 12 kinds of great Tao spells before she gave up. As a result, every 100 years, that senior sister's face turned uglier. In the end, she became the person with the worst temper in White Emperor City. Chai Bofu sat cross-legged. His Yuanying and Jindan had disappeared and shattered one after another. He no longer cared about the damage to his Tao. He had to survive first before anything else. Ji Yukan squatted beside Chai Bofu and asked, "I'm very curious. Why didn't you pretend to be Shu Han? Why didn't you even think of framing him? How did you become a rogue cultivator? What's the secret behind it?" Ji Yukan stretched out his hand and pressed Chai Bofu's head. "You practice the water arts, and I happen to have learned the river severing sutra. If I take this opportunity to intercept your natal primordial chi and water fate, and then refine your gold core fragments, it will be a wonderful thing that will happen naturally. Tell me, what kind of secret relationship do you have with Clearwind City or Fox Nation to make you so righteous when you kill people for their treasures? Chai Bofu, who had the appearance of a young man, had a pale expression on his face. Although his white hair looked old, it was still shiny and full of vitality. But now, more than half of his hair had withered away. Ji Kan casually pressed his head, and some of his hair fell to the ground and turned into ashes in midair before they could fall to the ground. Ji Kan slightly increased his strength. With one of the trump cards of the river-severing sutra, he began to wantonly seize the water fate of Chai Bofu. The small world of Chai Bofu's body was already in a mess, like a flood pouring down. Ji Kan's technique was like cutting a big hole in a shaky dam, taking only the water fate and taking it into his pocket. As for whether the flood would break all the dams and make Chai Bofu's path of cultivation even worse, Ji Kan did not care at all whether he would have a chance to return to the Jindan or Yuanying realm in this life. Chai Bofu immediately spilled the beans and began to reveal the truth. Shu Han's wife and I used to be brothers and sisters in the same sect. So, I want to set a trap for Shu Han, the city lord, but I don't want the entire Clearwind City to be in danger. The Shu family doesn't even have a chance to cry out for justice. That little girl is in trouble, and as the city lord, Shu Han cannot absolve himself from the blame for failing to protect her. But if I were to pretend to be Shu Han and snatch the treasure, and accidentally leave the little girl or Wei Benyuan half dead, the Clearbreeze City would lose the great future of the sect. I don't want that junior sister's efforts to go down the drain. Chai Bofu had mixed feelings when he mentioned his junior sister. His expression and eyes were filled with regret. Liu Kaicheng smiled and said, "Infatuated, really infatuated. I like it. No wonder I hit it off with brother Longbo." Ji Kan thought for a moment and asked with a smile, "Shu Han's son?" Chai Bofu said angrily, "Shu Han is not a fool. Why would he help me raise my son? My sister and I are innocent. Don't you dare insinuate and spout nonsense." Ji Kan retracted his hand and said, "What a pity." Ji Kan suddenly stretched out his hand and continued to intercept the water and extract the gold core fragments. He asked, "You don't think Shu Han is a fool, but you think I'm a fool? Tell me, is your sister at a higher level than you, or does she have something against you? Otherwise, your sincerity is too much. Wild cultivators have their reasons for breaking the rules. Since that kid is not your son, your reason is not enough. Love. If you really can't forget, when Clearwind City is in danger and is about to be destroyed, Shu Han snatched your sister and you took his wife and son to raise. Can't you do it?" Chai Bofu opened his eyes, as if he wanted to see the young man's face. He smiled bitterly and said, "Although I'm a wild cultivator, I don't think there are any natural wild cultivators. Ji Kan, good boy, you are one." Chai Bofu was silent for a moment and said, "My sister has been shrewd since she was young. After I worked with her to kill my master, before she married into the Shu family of Clearwind City, I only knew that she had another sex inheritance. It was very secretive. I have always been afraid of her and never dared to offend her." Ji Kan turned to look at Liu Kaicheng and said with a smile, "My level is low, so it doesn't matter if I'm a fool. What about you? Do you still think this brother Longbo is infatuated?" Liu Kaicheng said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. I'm a fool." Ji Kan retracted his hand and stood up. He looked at Clearwind City, which had a high chance of becoming an immortal sect. Uncle Chai's heart turned to ashes. After being tormented by that little bastard Ji Kan, even his Dragon Gate realm was going to have holes everywhere, and it was going to be very difficult to mend them. Ji Kan said, "Let's not go to Clearwind City. Let's go back to the town." Liu Kaicheng said with a smile, "Up to you." Ji Kan said, "When we're in my hometown, I advise you to take it easy." Liu Chicheng's face was extremely ugly. Back then, Chen Pinggan, Qi Jingchun, and today's Li Baoping and the Sage of Lust. In addition, there was Ji Kan, who was too lazy to hide his killing intent, Ma Kuxuan, who had joined Marshall Mountain, and Song Mu, the young lord of Dali. They were all F***king people who had walked out of that **tty place. Liu Kai-cheng immediately changed his mind. Let's go north first. Then Brother Longbow and I will wait for you at the border of Pearl Cave Heaven. We won't go to the town with you. Ji Yukan said with a smile, as long as you restrain yourself, you don't have to be so cautious. Liu Kai-cheng said in a heavy tone, what if? Why bother? Ji Yukan asked, what if Li Baoping goes to the Fox Kingdom? Liu Kai-cheng said with a smile, that little girl is not as simple as you think. Let's just talk about her own means. In the small Fox Kingdom, whoever dares to touch her will have his tail cut off. Ji Yukan's face was gloomy. Liu Kai-cheng, although I don't know why you changed your mind, don't forget that I'm going back to my hometown. Don't make me go to the Li family's ancestral house on Fulu Street. Liu Kai-cheng said with a smile, oh, your habit of turning your back on me is scary. Liu Kai-cheng was angry when he said this. He looked down at Chai Bofu, who was still sitting on the ground. He raised his foot and stepped on the head of the young nascent soul. He slightly increased his strength and smashed the young man into the ground, leaving only half of his head above the ground. Chai Bofu didn't dare to move. Liu Kai-cheng squatted down. The sleeves of his wide pink robe were spread on the ground, as if an unusually beautiful peony had bloomed out of thin air. Liu Kai-cheng said impatiently, I'll give you half an hour at most. If you can't stabilize the small Dragon Gate realm by then, I won't protect you anymore. Ji Yukan suddenly asked, have you been to the inverted hanging mountain? Liu Kai-cheng didn't even raise his head. He said frankly, I don't dare to go unless I'm with you. It didn't have much to do with the level of cultivation. The key was that Liu Qicheng's identity was not suitable to get close to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Ji Yukan said, what about Liu Kai-cheng? Liu Kai-cheng said, when we reach the White Emperor City, I will return this skin to him. If he is lucky, he will have a chance to become your fellow disciple. In the cottage in the Col, Li Baoping and Wei Benyuan also set off for the Fox Kingdom, which was allied with the Qingfeng city. Wei Benyuan naturally felt that the place where he refined elixirs was too dangerous. If he went to the Shu family in the Qingfeng city, he could at least give Ping Nizi a protective talisman. Wei Benyuan summoned the talisman boat, and it was extremely elegant. As it traveled with the wind, illusory jasper lotuses appeared around the boat. They suddenly grew and stood tall, and then slowly dissipated. Wherever the talisman boat passed by, it was as if a small boat had crashed into a lotus pond and opened up a waterway. When Li Baoping boarded the boat earlier, she took advantage of the fact that Grandpa Wei had boarded the boat first. With her back to him, she put her feet together and jumped onto the boat. It had been a long time since she made such a witty move. Obviously, she was in a good mood. She saw her brother, protected Grandpa Wei's place of cultivation, and could meet her youngest uncle again. When Wei Benyuan sat down at one end of the boat, Li Baoping was already standing and did not sit down. It was such a beautiful scenery. It would be a waste if she did not see it. Riding a horse and looking at the mountains and rivers was different from looking down on the earth. Wei Benyuan and Li Baoping told some hearsay. As for the truth, it was estimated that even the Shu family's disciples did not know what was written on their almanac. In the Fox Kingdom, where tens of thousands of fox spirits lived, the seven-tailed fox had been in seclusion for a long time. 700 years ago, it was divided into three forces. One wanted to integrate into the Qingfeng city and the Aquarius continent, the other wanted to fight for a small world isolated from the world, and the more extreme side wanted to completely tear up the alliance with the Shu family in the Qingfeng city. In the end, in the hands of the current master of the Qingfeng city, Shu Han, it became a confrontation between the two sides. The third force was encircled, killed, and imprisoned. It was also an important channel for the Qingfeng city to continuously produce the fox skin talisman. Moreover, after the woman took charge of the affairs, she had a knack for creating resources and making money. The overall number of fox imps in the Fox Nation had steadily increased. She had signed several secret agreements with the Fox Nation on behalf of Clear Breeze City. One of the agreements had long been a semi-public secret. The Shu clan had always provided the Fox Nation with cultivation resources, But if every fox imp failed to break through to the next realm, they had to maintain their fox pelt intact as a form of repayment to Clear Breeze City. Then there was the Qingfeng City in the Fox Kingdom, which built many mansions for tourists to enjoy. There were immortal masters who went down the mountain to travel, pure martial artists who roamed the Jianghu. Husbands, elegant scholars, they were all distinguished guests who did not need to pay out of their own pockets, all for the sake of making the fox spirits fall in love. Within the Fox Kingdom, the Shu family had painstakingly built scenic spots everywhere. There were cliff carvings by calligraphy masters, poetry inscriptions by literati, and old residences of immortals who had achieved Tao. Wei Benyuan smiled and said, "The Shu family is very good at making money, but their reputation is not very good." Li Baoping bought some books about scholars and beauties in the Qingfeng city. They were beautifully engraved, almost comparable to the books of the secular dynasties. However, she might not read them and planned to give them to Pei Qian in the future. In fact, Li Baoping did not have much yearning for the Jianghu romance and the supernatural beings of the mountains and rivers. She could not compare to Pei Qian and Li Huai. In these years, apart from studying in the academy, Li Baoping had not been idle. She asked Lin Shuyi and Xie Xie about the ways of cultivation, and asked Yu Lu about the martial arts. The three of them naturally told Li Baoping everything they knew without holding anything back. Occasionally, they would meet Li Huai on the road, but it was a veritable chat. The Fox Kingdom was located in a broken paradise. The fragmented historical records were not very detailed, and most of them were just rumors and could not be taken seriously. Wei Benyuan landed the talisman boat at an entrance. It was a wooden building, hanging a plaque with the words intertwined branches. Most of the couplets on both sides were missing, but the lower half was well preserved. It was a pair of infatuated lovers appeared in the world. The upper half was only left with the three words home of warmth and tenderness at the end. There were also allusions, saying that a wandering immortal once cut it with a sword. Some said it was Li Tuanjing in the Wind and Thunder Garden, while others said it was Wei and Jin dynasties in the Wind and Snow Temple. The memorial archway was crowded with people. Most of them were men, especially scholars. Because the Fox Kingdom had a temple and a mountain, it was said that the two places were rich in literature. It was very efficacious to come here to pray and burn incense. It was easy to be proud of the exam results. As for some poor scholars who deliberately took a detour, hoping to earn some money in the Fox Kingdom. The beauties in the Fox Kingdom were famous for their preference for scholars. There were also many down-and-out scholars who were willing to die of old age and tenderness in the Fox Kingdom. It was not a lie to say that the Fox Immortals were infatuated. Whenever their beloved man passed away, they would not ask to be born in the same year and month, but they would ask to die in the same year and month. If one wanted to travel to the Fox Kingdom, the rules were very interesting. One had to give poems and essays in exchange for the passage fee. Poems, lyrics, songs, prose, and even essays for the exam were all acceptable. As long as one was talented enough, even a couplet was fine. However, if one's writing was not pleasing to the eyes of the Fox Immortals, one could only return home. It did not matter whether one had to hire someone to write for them. If one could not come up with a good essay, then one could only spend the Immortals' money. Li Baoping glanced at the splendid loft not far from the memorial archway and frowned. The Shu family of Clear Breeze City and the Fox Kingdom were accumulating literary fortune here. Many little drops make an ocean. What were they trying to do? What could they do? The Shu family of Clear Breeze City had lowered themselves and married off their legitimate daughter to a concubine's son. They also wanted to form a marriage alliance with the Yuan family of the Pillar Nation of Dali. Could it be that the Shu family had some ulterior motive for the future of the Dali kingdom? They wanted to let a Shu family disciple who had the ability to carry the literary fortune to occupy a position, step by step to become a high-ranking official, and eventually control part of the politics of the Dali kingdom and become the next pillar nation? Li Baoping began to think back to the time when the Shu mother and son from the Clear Breeze city had gone to the small town. No, I have to ask grandfather if the Shu mother and son had used any kind of concealment techniques to conceal their true plans. There was one thing that youngest uncle did not mind, but Li Baoping always had a small knot in her heart. That was the mountain-moving ape of Xingyang Mountain and the little girl who had stayed with the Li family on Fulu Street in the small town. If that was the only thing, it would be fine. But she was afraid of the conspiracy of these people on the mountain. Zhu He, Zhu Lu, and her second brother Li Baozhen had already done 2 things. They could not do more than 3 times. Wei Benyuan took out 2 sums of money and walked into the Fox Kingdom with Li Baoping. In the loft, a languid woman who was lying on the desk suddenly raised her head. She was excited and immediately sent a flying sword to the Shu family's sword room in Clearbreeze City. Soon, a flying sword flew back and gave her a rough file. The wording at the end of the secret letter was not tactful. It told her not to have any improper thoughts and not to provoke the disciple of the Cliff Academy and the legitimate granddaughter of the Li family's Yuanying realm. Now that Clearbreeze City was a candidate for the sect, they should not cause any trouble. That greatly displeased the woman, and the woman with a pair of extremely long artificial armor on her fingers tore up the secret letter bit by bit. Although her heart was filled with unwillingness, she still did not dare to defy the Clearbreeze City's decision and had no choice but to lie back lazily on the table. Peach Sprout was cultivating beside a waterfall in the Fox Kingdom. Wei Benyuan's so-called fated chance was that Peach Sprout accidentally passed by the waterfall and saw a piece of colorful silk floating on the water surface. Soon, a Jindan fox fairy rushed over and wanted to snatch the fated chance from Peach Sprout. Unexpectedly, it was beaten by the silk and was almost dragged into the deep pool by its ankles. When the fox fairy fled in panic, the silk floated on the water surface again and swayed to the shore. Peach Sprout picked it up and seemed to recognize it as its master. It became a colorful belt for the maidservant of the Wei clan in the Peach Leaf Alley. Not only that, under its guidance, Peach Sprout also picked up an inconspicuous dried peach branch deep in the mountains. After refining it, it became another magic weapon that hid its strength. In a single night, Taoya became the luckiest person in the Fox Kingdom in several hundred years. Within the borders of the Fox Kingdom, it was not allowed to travel by wind or take ferries. One could only walk. Fortunately, there were 3 entrances to the Fox Kingdom. Wei Benyuan chose the gate closest to Taoya, so he hired a carriage and rented a horse for Ping Nizi. One of them drove the carriage himself while the other rode the horse with a saber. They enjoyed the scenery along the way, stopping every now and then, so the journey did not seem boring. When they arrived at the waterfall halfway up the mountain, Taoya, who had already grown to be very fresh, could not help but feel a little ashamed when she saw the current Li Baoping. In the end, after the 3 of them drank tea, Li Baoping finished reminiscing about the past and got up to leave. She said that she wanted to return north and go to the capital of Dali to find a friend. As for the horse she had left by the stream in the valley, she could just let it be. It had accompanied her through thousands of mountains and rivers, so it should take a rest. Wei Benyuan did not know whether to laugh or cry. Taoya was also caught unprepared. Wei Benyuan asked, "Change to the horse at the foot of the mountain?" Li Baoping patted her head and said with a smile, "I forgot to tell Grandpa Wei that I am also a Qi refinement warrior now. My realm is not high, but I can ride the wind." Li Baoping added, "I can ride the sword too. I don't like it under normal circumstances. The wind is strong in the sky and my cheeks hurt when I talk." The old man and Taoya looked at each other. Li Baoping thought about it and did not want to hide it. "I have some papers. The words on them are close to me and can be turned into a talisman boat. It's just that Mr. Maro does not want me to take them out easily." Wei Benyuan asked helplessly, "Do you have more?" Li Baoping shook her head and said, "No, I only learned some boxing skills from a friend. I am not a pure martial artist at the wind-controlling realm. I can't rely on my physique to travel far away." Wei Benyuan got up and said, "Then let Taoya send you out of the Fox Kingdom. Otherwise, Grandpa Wei will not be at ease. Taoya's realm might not be as high as the old man's for the time being. However, her 2 natal items were too mysterious. They could attack and defend and could be regarded as the cultivation of a golden core cultivator." Li Baoping smiled and said, "Forget it. I won't delay Sister Taoya's cultivation." She winked at Sister Taoya. Taoya understood and blushed. She was even more puzzled. How did little treasure bottle know that she had a man she liked? If she did not have a man she liked, why would a woman who lived alone put on light rouge? As for the old man, if he did things with Taoya's cultivation, he would be very attentive. As for such details, why would he care? Li Baoping said goodbye and left. From the south to the north, they traveled through the mountains and rivers and passed through the Fox Kingdom. On the way, there was a heavy snowfall. A young woman in a red cotton-padded jacket stood beside a cliff and stretched out her hands to breathe. The narrow saber and the blade-strengthening gourd at the woman's waist were compatible with the heavy snow. Therefore, at that moment, it was as if there were only two colors in the entire world: the bright snow and the woman's beauty. In the capital city of Nanyuan Country, lotus-blessed land, a young girl stood up and went to the yard. She opened the boxing ring and said to the little girl squatting on the railing, "Little Mealy, I'm going to punch. You go to Zhuoyuan Alley and buy some melon seeds." The little girl in black was a little reluctant. "I'll just take a look. I won't say anything. There are still some melon seeds in my pocket." In fact, it was her duty. She was the right guardian of Luopa Mountain and also the deputy leader of the branch. How could she not help Pei Qian at this time? The young girl glared at her and said, "I don't know how to control my punch." "How can it be? Martial arts don't have eyes. They come over like knives falling from the sky. How big is the pot of pickled fish tonight?" Zhu Meili quickly got up and jumped down from the railing. She took a small pole and a walking stick and ran far away. Suddenly, she stopped and turned around to ask, "How many kilograms of melon seeds do you want? I heard from Sister Nuanshu that if you buy more, it'll be cheaper. If you buy less, you won't get a discount." Pei Qian said helplessly, "It's up to you." Zhu Meili frowned and raised the small pole high. "Then I'll pick up a sack at the end of the pole?" The little girl felt that she was already so clever that she was out of control. Pei Qian nodded. In fact, she was already speechless. Zhu Meili looked at Pei Qian and knew how to control the situation. She immediately tiptoed and jumped over the courtyard wall. After Xiao Meili left, Pei Qian stepped out and stomped the ground. Almost the entire capital of Nanyuan Kingdom shook. To be able to cause such a phenomenon, it was naturally not something that a fifth-realm martial artist could do with a stomp. It was more of a fist intent that affected the mountains and rivers. Even the dragon veins of Nanyuan Kingdom were not spared. Pei Qian's arms twisted in a twisting posture. His fist move was extremely strange. After a slight pause, he gently punched out the deity drum beating style. After a moment, Pei Qian's whole person seemed to be following the fist. He was pulled by the fist intent, but also seemed to be punching out from his heart. He wanted to go to the highest point to deliver the last punch. The girl's figure suddenly rose. She stepped on the air and then flew towards the sky. Her figure was as fast as lightning. Finally, she arrived at the sky of the lotus root-blessed land. It seemed to be the place where the sun was hanging in the sky. Pei Qian finally delivered the last punch. After the punch, under the girl's feet, the vast golden sea of clouds under the sun suddenly dispersed. Almost all the Qi cultivators in the lotus root-blessed land who had stepped on the path of cultivation and were the first to enter the middle five realms subconsciously raised their heads to look at a certain place in the sky. Then, the heroic spirits, ghosts, and monsters that were born in this new blessed land also looked up at the sky in a daze. At the same time, the martial temples in Dali, the martial temples in the Aquarius continent, and some of the other large martial temples in the other 8 continents all sensed something. 8 streams of martial fate surged towards the Aquarius continent. In the end, they merged with the martial fate of the Aquarius continent and crashed into the Tongyi umbrella that was held by the mountain lord Wei Pai on Luo Po Mountain. All the large martial temples in Dali, especially the one in the immortal graveyard that was closest to Luo Po Mountain, the golden deities took the initiative to appear. They bowed and cupped their fists towards Luo Po Mountain. Wei Pai's snow-white robe fluttered. He tried his best to stabilize his body. His feet were rooted to the ground. He actually directly activated the mountain river divine art and connected himself with the entire Luo Po Mountain. Previously, he wanted to help cover up the aura. Now, There was no need to cover up. Just standing firmly and holding the Tongyi umbrella was already very strenuous for Wei Pai. This mountain lord of a continent still did not understand why Zhu Lian wanted him to hold the Tongyi umbrella. Now, Wei Pai was angry and amused. Zhu Lian. F*CKU. Regardless of the reputation of the mountain lord Wei, who held several night banquets, just the demeanor of a deity was excellent. Who knows how many female deities and fairies fell in love with him? As for the old steward of Luopo Mountain, forget it. Once you see his face, you will forget it. At most, you will remember his identity. Zhu Lian stood on the edge of the cliff near the bamboo building, smiling with his hands behind his back. The martial arts fate between heaven and earth surged and rushed towards Luopo Mountain. Even though Zhu Lian had the protection of his fist intent, his long robe was still torn into pieces by the countless flying sword-like martial arts fate. Over time, the skin that had covered Zhu Lian's face for many years peeled off bit by bit, and finally revealed his true appearance. Zhu Lian stretched out 2 fingers and twirled a strand of hair. He smiled with squinted eyes. The young Zhu Lian, with such a face, he could charm the hearts of beauties. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.